Chapter 626. Roar. The young green-eyed dragon that broke out of its shell raised its head and let out a slightly immature roar. The pressure that belonged to the dragon species instantly spread out. Dake looked at the Knight of Shield, on the red side, and ordered without hesitation. Attack! The young green-eyed dragon flapped its wings and charged towards the red side with excitement. Dake himself summoned Illusory Beast, Ibu, the moment it charged out. When Illusory Beast, Ibu was summoned, the young green-eyed dragon had already crossed half of the field and its big round eyes were surging with boiling battle intent. Knight of Shield, Justin Wayne suddenly shouted. Ultimate skill, Shield of Glory. The burly Knight of Shield suddenly let out a roar and poured all of his strength into the giant shield. Website. https://m. Vipcanshu. VIP. The emblem on the giant shield instantly lit up, and a bright golden light covered the entire surface of the shield, forming a light shadow that was even bigger than the shield. Justin Wayne, who finally waited until the cooldown of his summoning spell was over, immediately focused on summoning the second magic card in his hand. The next moment, the charging young green-eyed dragon fiercely collided with the Shield of Glory. The golden light of the Shield of Glory trembled crazily and the heavy giant shield was knocked back. The Knight of Shield almost merged with the giant shield. Bang! The golden light exploded. The young green-eyed dragon's charge was actually forcefully blocked by the Knight of Shield. Although the Knight of Shield behind the giant shield was already weak, the burning aura on its body did not decrease but instead increased. Card name, Knight of Shield. Type, Elf card. Level, *****. Race, Human. Attribute, Normal. Magic power, 1100. Attack, 0 defense, 2000. Ultimate skill, Shield of Glory. Dake was not surprised by this. This was not the first time Justin Wayne's Knight of Shield appeared. Its powerful defense that surpassed stars was amazing. But it could only be used once, not twice. The Shield Knight had used up all of his power just to block the attack. Without the protection of the Shield of Glory, it was impossible for it to block the second attack of the young blue-eyed dragon. But when the young blue-eyed dragon suddenly turned its body and was about to use its dragon tail to viciously lash at the giant shield, Justin Wayne finally managed to complete the summoning at this moment. The second knight appeared in the red square summoning zone. It was a skeleton knight, wearing broken armor and riding on a skeleton horse. Card name, Skeleton Knight. Type, Elf card. Level, *****. Race, Undying. Attribute, Spectre. Type. Magic power, 900. Attack, 1000. Defense, 900. Ultimate skill, Decaying Justice. Knight's Immortality. The Skeletal Knight, which had 2 sure kill skills, had extremely lousy stats, but as an undying species with 2 sure kill skills, it became Justin Wayne's core magic card. Decaying Justice allowed the Skeletal Knight to completely abandon its defense and gain a powerful attack value of 1900 points at the cost of 0 defense value. Knight's Immortality allowed the Skeletal Knight, or its knight companion, to obtain a chance to avoid death. The specific effect was similar to Kettle Pot's Sturdy, but it could be used on the knight on the right. Therefore, the moment it was summoned, Justin Wayne hurriedly shouted, Knight's Immortality. Target the Knight's Immortality. The Skeletal Knight, who understood the Archmage's command, immediately turned its brain and used its hollow eyes to stare at the Knight's Immortality. The next moment, the black light from its eyes drilled into the Knight's Immortality's body. Then the young blue-eyed dragon's dragon tail viciously whipped the Knight's Immortality's giant shield. The Knight's magic power dropped at a speed visible to the naked eye. When its magic power dropped to 0, the Knight's Immortality's giant shield and body had become completely transparent. However, it did not die, but continued to stand on the battlefield with its specter body. That giant shield that was like a city wall was still blocking in front of the blue square magic ball. Looking at the scene in front of it, the young blue-eyed dragon suddenly stopped and curiously observed the Knight's immortality. It even raised its claws, obviously wanting to poke it to see. In this urgent duel arena, the young blue-eyed dragon's childish actions caused the situation to suddenly slow down. Justin Wayne made sure that the young blue-eyed dragon was no longer attacking before he let out a sigh of relief. The 30-second countdown of the first round had ended, and if he could draw that crucial magic card, there was still a chance to defeat the young blue-eyed dragon. Dake had never shown the dragon egg transformation's rebirth ability in front of the public, so Justin Wayne did not know about it. Battle Stage 2, 30s. But when Justin Wayne was about to reach for the card, he suddenly realized that Dake Dimming on the blue square contestant stage was flipping another magic card over. Seeing that the surface of the magic card was already suffused with a black light, he suddenly raised his head to look at the projection above. In an instant, he saw the surface of the magic card clearly. It was the magic card that Dark had publicly used in the duel, the Underworld Soul Ring, that had left a deep impression on him. In the name of Dake Dimming, I summon the Underworld Soul Ring. A collar that was burning with gray flames was summoned. Dake turned his wrist and pointed the magic card in his hand forward. The Underworld Soul Ring suddenly disappeared, and when it reappeared, it was already on the neck of the Skeleton Knight. The knight's magic power had already reached 0, but the Skeleton Knight was still full. There was no need to say much about the choice. Dake did not give Justin Wayne a chance to continue dragging the battle back. The moment the Underworld Soul Ring was on the neck of the Skeleton Knight, a vigorous gray flame suddenly ignited. After that, Dake raised his hand and forcefully pulled the Skeleton Knight into the air and quickly dragged it towards the blue square. At the same time, he gave a new order to the young blue-eyed dragon. Wake up! The young blue-eyed dragon instantly clenched its fingers into a fist, and with a stern expression, it punched the transparent shield of the Knight of Shield. That Knight of Shield, which had a complete defense and did not have any trace of magic power remaining, was suddenly smashed into pieces by this sudden punch. After that, the young blue-eyed dragon charged towards the red square magic ball without hesitation. On the red square contestant stage, Justin Wayne's expression changed greatly, and he instantly raised his hand to point at the magic ball. Magic power threads shot out crazily, sticking to the magic ball. Justin Wayne pulled hard, and that red magic ball was pulled upwards. However, the young blue-eyed dragon instantly spread its wings, and with a stomp of its feet, it shot into the air with a boom. The punch from below almost instantly shattered the magic ball's life enchantment. At the same time, the red magic ball, which only had 1,000 magic power points remaining, was also sent flying upwards by this punch. The young blue-eyed dragon flapped its wings and suddenly chased after it. Justin Wayne's expression became even more urgent. At this stage of the duel, unless the Archmage had the ability to multitask, or the life enchantment of the magic ball could withstand one attack, there was basically no way to reverse the situation. Dake looked at the situation on the stage, and decisively stopped the sacrificial summoning. At this moment, it was meaningless to use the Skeleton Knight as a sacrifice to summon the Diru beast. The young blue-eyed dragon was enough to end this duel. The previous duels between the strong seniors were all like this. If one was not careful, they would lose the entire game at the beginning. No matter how many trump cards were hidden in the deck, the opponent would not give you the chance to use them. Dake Dimming's duel method was not something that the new second-year duelists could deal with. Justin Wayne tried his best to control the magic ball to dodge, but the young blue-eyed dragon easily caught up, and then smashed the last of the life enchantment with a slap. As the magic power of the red magic ball returned to 0, the duel came to an end. Beep! The battle is over. Winner, Dake Dimming. The referee announced the end of the duel. He also announced the end of Dake Dimming's Silver Cup points competition. He would temporarily leave the Silver Cup's arena and focus more on the higher-level competitions. After Dake recalled the Magic Elves one by one, he nodded slightly at Justin Wayne and walked down the stage. Justin Wayne was not depressed for too long, and he also walked down the stage after Dake left. For the second-year students, there was still a long time, and there was still a lot of time left in the second year. The temporary failure was not important. What was important was whether he could learn something useful from this failure. Next, Justin Wayne would also sign up for the Golden Cup, which was not limited to any grade, like all the other second-year students who had obtained the dual qualification. Although most of the second-year students were destined to be rabbits squeezed into a pack of wolves, this was the purpose of Professor Pawa Cheong-si. After Dake left the stage, he left the open-air duel arena. The Silver Cup was temporarily over. The makeup for Halloween was also more or less ready. Next, in addition to continuing to study the method of refining the clown mask into an item card, he also needed to spend more time on the astrology and alchemy classes. The difficulty of these two elective classes was rapidly increasing with the advancement of the course. Especially the astrology class. Dake had found that he was gradually unable to keep up with the teaching progress of the astrology class. First, it was because Professor Mitya Bartholomew's teaching content was becoming more and more specialized, and second, it was because his divination talent could not keep up. But Dake did not feel that he had a divination talent from the beginning, so he was not too depressed. What made him more worried was that little Ivan was also unable to keep up. What troubled Ivan was, of course, not the divination talent, but the fact that his knowledge was not enough. This meant that even if he evolved into Son Ivan, he would not be able to master it. The only thing Dake could do now was to copy the notes as thoroughly as possible for future research. Even if he did not pass the astrology class this year, he could still study according to the notes. As Ivan's knowledge increased, there would be a day when he would be able to master astrology. As for Dake himself, he had his own specialization. He was very open-minded in this regard. On the other hand, Dake performed well in the alchemy class. Although Professor Zayer's teaching content was becoming more and more in-depth, his talent in alchemy was clearly far stronger than in astrology. So far, he had not encountered a situation where he could not understand the teaching content. But as the class progressed, Professor Zayer also began to assign homework. This included homework related to alchemy experiments, which took a lot of time. In this situation, Dake had already grasped some basic alchemy, and he was getting closer and closer to his goal of making golems. A week passed quietly in the midst of the increasingly heavy schoolwork. On the last weekend, a few days before Halloween, the second-year students seemed to have suddenly gotten rid of the delay, and the festive atmosphere finally erupted. In fact, Dake Dimming had already received several invitations to the ball, and this weekend, he received even more invitations. He had clearly rejected some of the girls last year, but this year, he received their invitations again. While Dake politely rejected them, he sometimes wondered why these girls, who had not interacted with him for a year, thought that an invitation could change the result. Fortunately, Halloween was not Christmas, and the romantic atmosphere of the second year was indeed a lot weaker, so he did not receive too much harassment. October 26th, Saturday. Dake once again met up with Deanna and Luoc to pick up the makeup items that he ordered last week from Travelers Street. Then, the three of them strolled around Travelers Street for a while, and only returned to their dorms after lunch. After returning to the dormitory, Dark excitedly equipped himself with the vampiric fangs, pointed ears, and wings. He then looked at the vampiric wings in the mirror, and suddenly had the idea of making them into item cards. The reason was naturally because the vampire wings on his back were big and stupid, and they could not be moved. Whether it was in terms of aesthetics or flexibility, there were huge flaws. So he decided to do it. Dake's research on item cards had reached a certain level of attainment. Moreover, the vampire wings were not difficult to buy. It was just that the vampire wings that were mass-produced lacked special features. So even if the creation failed, it was not a big problem. There are two elements. One is to make the vampire wings move. The second is to allow the vampire's wings to shrink and shrink. The former is very simple, but the latter is somewhat difficult. But if we do not pursue the strength of the vampire wings, and do not need to add the ability to fly, Dake analyzed for a while, and then directly began to experiment. After 2 hours, he was a little excited and held a magic card in his hand. If one were to insist on a description of this magic card, it should be classified as a type of outfit card. A transparent human figure was drawn on the surface of the magic card, as well as the vampire's wings, fangs, and sharp ears that were mounted on the transparent human figure. Yes, he had incorporated the fangs and ears into the card as well. Not only that, but the transparent human figure only had makeup on his face, making his face pale and his eye sockets deep, as if there were thick dark circles under his eyes. The name of the magic card was Vampire's Ritual. After using the usual summoning spell to summon it, one could obtain a disguise similar to that of a vampire. He pressed the magic card on his chest to experiment, and as expected, it was successfully summoned. And with the injection of magic, it was very simple to control the vibration of the wings, and it was lifelike. In addition, it could also shrink the vampire wings to the size of a palm, like a pair of chicken wings when it was not in use. He thought for a while, and then put on the black suit he bought before, and then put on the top hat, picked up the cane, and summoned the vampire's ritual again, and perfectly disguised as the noble Mr. Vampire. Needles don't poke. Compared to the Night Prince set, last year, Dake obviously liked this set of makeup more. At least it made him look like he was really attending a Christmas masquerade ball, and not some noble dinner party. I wonder how Deanna and Luosi are preparing. Dake touched his chin a little curious, but he did not go and ask. Just like how he did not ask about Panduola's Halloween costume at all. Those would all become the surprises of Halloween. Furthermore, this year's Halloween seemed to have even more surprises. From this week onwards, there was a sudden rumor that this year's Halloween event would be completely different from the past. Obviously, the Academy had been using the same set of rules for so many years, and at most, they would adjust the credit rewards of various ghosts. But when he thought about how Professor Kazair was addicted to Heart of God, Dake felt that the rumor was much more credible. Without Professor Kazair presiding over the event, the professors in the Academy could really do anything. Among them, Professor Lily needed to be the most vigilant. But because of this, Dake was looking forward to it even more. Although the rules of the Halloween event were classic, he had already participated in it once, and naturally, he hoped that there would be a new experience in the new year. Dong dong dong. Dake raised his head and looked at the door, then pouted at the little monster. He removed the vampire's ritual costume and quickly cleaned up the remnants of the experiment. Not many people would come to look for him at this time. There were even fewer people who were limited to the noble courtyard. Deanna and Luosi were the most likely, but they still had lunch together at noon today, and the probability of them coming in the afternoon was not high. And apart from them, Aurora came the most frequently. However, Aurora always appeared at night, and he could hardly see her during the day. If it's not them, who could it be? Eudora? Dake turned his head and looked at the door. The little monster had already opened the door, and today's uninvited guests finally poked their heads in. It was Anna and Enchi. Good morning. You ****. Looking for monthly votes. Chapter 627. Since school started in September this year, Anna and Enchi rarely came to find trouble with Dake. Especially after the math class incident, they took the initiative to avoid him. Of course, they didn't settle down. Dake could always get all kinds of information from Aurora. Although they had always been very obedient in math class, they were more and more unscrupulous outside of that. The first grade was still in a mess. It was rare for the two of them to take the initiative to come today. Wait a minute. Dake let the little monsters take care of them while he continued to tidy up. 10 minutes later, he put away the last of the bottles, washed his hands, and walked to the desk. Anna and Enchi were sipping apple juice and looking at the various furnishings in the room curiously. Did you encounter any trouble? Dake asked directly. Remember the URL. MVIP, can't you? Vienna and Enchi rolled their eyes at him almost at the same time and said, Can't we come if there's no trouble? Dake pulled out a chair and sat down, asking, Have you been here before? I've been here before. Anna immediately raised her hand and glanced at the third princess, Enchi. Enchi immediately exposed her. Don't think I don't know what you're here for. Anna stuck out her tongue and said, Ha ha ha. Dake shook his head and smiled. Okay, what's the matter? The two little princesses stopped playing. Anna rolled her eyes and said, Here's the thing. Enchi took a fancy to a outfit card in Traveler's Street, but she doesn't have enough credits. Didn't you take a fancy to it? Enchi immediately blurted out. Anna said in surprise, No way, sister. I'm kind enough to accompany you to borrow credits, but you're pushing the blame to me? You're the sister. Enchi retorted. It's you who wants that outfit card. Anna. It's you. Enchi. It's you. Seeing that the two little princesses were about to quarrel again, Dake couldn't help but cover his forehead and say, "Wait, the outfit card isn't expensive, right? I remember that there are only 3 levels, 33 credits, 66 credits, and 88 credits. Although there are surprisingly many people selling it this year." As he spoke, he suddenly stopped. He saw that the two little princesses were embarrassed. They were obviously showing a guilty conscience. His heart skipped a beat, and he asked hesitantly, "You can't even take out a 2-digit number of credits?" The little princesses, who were still trying to be brave, immediately looked away and did not say a word. Gigi. The little devil beast suddenly let out an ear-piercing laugh. The rest of the other elves who were in the dormitory were also curious. Even the credits in their branch cards were more than double digits. What's wrong with these two humans? How poor they were. Anna and Enchi, who suddenly revealed their poverty, were no longer as arrogant as before. After a long silence, Anna curled her lips and said, "You can only get 10 credits for a normal class. Even if you answer the questions correctly, you can only get 5 credits. Although the consumer goods on Traveler's Street aren't expensive, if you want to do experiments, you have to buy your own materials and experimental tools. The Academy doesn't allow holy coins. How can it be enough?" Yes. And she immediately agreed. The two sisters had never been so congenial before. Dake rolled his eyes and said, "This isn't the reason why you can't even afford a outfit card. Tell me, what do you want to buy?" Anna and Enchi suddenly stopped talking. The two quickly looked at each other and felt that Dake was becoming more and more annoying as he grew up. Anna was a little angry. "Just tell me if you want to borrow it or not." Dake looked at her angry face and suddenly wanted to laugh. However, he successfully restrained himself and asked, "How much do you want to borrow? When do you want to pay it back? How much is the interest?" Anna widened her eyes and said with a look of disbelief, "Interest? You're actually asking us for interest? Dake, you've changed." Dake said with a serious face, "This is the Academy's rule. Every transaction between students must be of equal value. If I lend you credits, you have to pay me interest or something of equivalent value." And she immediately interrupted, "I've read the Academy's rules. The Academy's rules don't prohibit giving gifts." Dake said indifferently, "You need a reason to give a gift." And she immediately said, "A Halloween gift." Dake shook his head. "Halloween isn't here yet." And she suddenly said angrily, "What's wrong with it being a little earlier? Dake, when did you become so rigid?" However, after saying that, she suddenly seemed to realize something and calmed down. Then she suddenly changed her expression and said with a smile, "Then pay me interest. As long as you lend me enough credits, I'll give you a chance to have the first dance with me at the last ball of Halloween. You have to think about it carefully. A chance to dance with me is hard to buy." Hey Enchi. However, when Enchi finished speaking, Anna looked at her in surprise as if she was looking at an indescribable creature. "Why are you looking at me?" Enchi turned her head and stared at her. "Can't you see that I'm selling my beauty? Why don't you do it?" "Fine, I'll do it." Anna immediately stuck out her chest. Dake's mouth twitched and he said, "Forget it. If you can pay me back in a week, there will be no interest. However, I can't lend you too much." Today was October 26th. There were 7 days in a week, which meant that it would be the afternoon of November 2nd next month. Even if Anna and Enchi didn't say anything, he could guess that the reason why they wanted to borrow credits was most likely related to the activities on Halloween. However, as long as there were serious activities, it was easy to harvest thousands of credits during the activities. Therefore, as long as they didn't lend too many credits, there was no situation where they couldn't pay it back. After he said that, Anna and Enchi immediately stopped arguing. Almost at the same time, they patted their chests and said, "Don't worry, we'll pay you back in a week. If we can't pay you back, I'll give Anna and Enchi to you as a pillow." Dake thought for a moment and said, "That's not necessary. If you can't pay me back in a week, you'll have to pay 3% interest. After 2 weeks, I'll use my authority as a teacher to force you to pay. So, don't think that you can deny it." Anna and Enchi didn't want to deny it. They nodded without hesitation and said, "Okay. That's good." Dake said. How much are you going to borrow? Both of them raised a finger at the same time. Dake estimated, 1,000. Anna boldly said, 10,000. Dake shook his head, 1,000. TSK. Anna puffed up her cheeks, 1,000 it is. Plus the credits I've accumulated before, it should be enough. Wait, and she suddenly interrupted, 1,000 each. Dake thought for a moment and said, okay. 1,000 each would be 2,000 credits. 2,000 credits was a huge amount for first-year students who had just entered the school for 2 months. The reason why Dark chose to lend it out was because he wanted to see what the two of them could come up with. After all, what kind of Halloween would it be if no one messed with it? Then, the three of them took out their school cards and used them to draw up 2 loan contracts. After signing the contract, Dake transferred 1,000 credits to each of them. The moment the credits were in their hands, the two princesses couldn't help but grin. Then they drank the apple juice in one gulp and said excitedly, then we'll go first. With the credits, they naturally had to spend it. They had to hurry before the sky turned dark. Dake shook his head and watched them leave. However, An-Chi, who was walking behind, had just closed the door when it suddenly opened. A head popped out from the crack of the door and asked with curved eyes, are you really not going to consider the interest I mentioned? Dake smiled. It's going to be dark if we don't leave now. An-Chi giggled, retracted his head, and closed the door. Then the footsteps behind the door gradually faded away. After Anna and An-Chi left, Dake couldn't help but think of Victoria and Phoenix, who were also first-year students. Ever since they entered October, he rarely paid attention to Victoria and Phoenix. Apart from not wanting them to feel restricted by their parents, the more reason was that he was too busy. Even before and after the first-year mathematics class, he didn't have much time. As a result, he basically got all the information about the 2 magic elves from Aurora. It just so happens that the research on the item card is almost over. Let's find time to have a meal tomorrow. Dake couldn't help but estimate. Therefore, that night, when Aurora delivered supper as usual, Dake was prepared to ask her to pass a message. Although the first-year dormitory was downstairs, the boys' and girls' dormitories had always been separated from each other. He also needed to avoid suspicion. Aurora followed Dake's suggestion and tried to make wheat cakes tonight. The filling made of shrimp skin, chopped green onions, diced meat, dried tofu, eggs, and other things was wrapped in the wheat cakes. The fragrance spread everywhere with a bite. Every magic elf present ate one, and oil flowed out of their mouths. Dake couldn't help but sigh as he recalled the familiar taste of the wheat cakes. Aurora was always able to make a perfect dish on her first try. Her talent in cooking was amazing. After distributing the wheat cakes, Aurora said, I actually made a lot more, but I'm keeping it warm in the dormitory for the time being. I'll bring it over tomorrow morning. When the time comes, I can bring it to the club classroom to share with the other magic elves. How thoughtful. Dake sighed. Aurora continued. Oh right, I already sent a portion to Victoria and Phoenix before I came. They said it was very delicious. Dake nodded and said, call them over tomorrow. Let's have a meal together. It's not a problem to inform them, Aurora said curiously. Why did you suddenly think of asking them to have a meal together? Dake smiled and said, I suddenly feel that I don't care enough about them. It's a pity that Aunt Claire has already left school. Otherwise, I would have called her over. Aunt Claire has already left? Aurora was a little surprised. Dake nodded and said, she left last Sunday night. Irene also left together with her. Aurora suddenly said, no wonder I only saw one person when I passed by the duel shop. Dake nodded and said, yes, only Sister Eve is left for now. However, we're already hiring clerks. We expect to hire 1 or 2 juniors as part-time employees. If you know anyone who is lacking credits, you can also recommend them. Aurora immediately said, can I? Dake was startled, then smiled and said, if you're lacking credits, you can look for me directly. I've eaten your supper for 2 months for free. According to the school rules, I can pay you a sum of credits. Aurora bit her lips slightly, obviously conflicted. Dake waved the wheat cake in his hand and said, don't be embarrassed. This is an equivalent exchange. Aurora hesitated for a moment and said softly, Then, I need 200. No, 150 credits. Dake couldn't help but want to laugh. Do you have the branch card? I'll round it up for you. Thus, when Aurora thought that she had rounded it up to 200 credits, Dake gave her 1,000 credits. Without waiting for her to refuse, Dake said, almost every supper costs 10 credits. 1,000 credits for 100 times. The extra 50 times can be considered as an advance payment. Aurora grabbed the branch card and whispered, it doesn't matter if it's 50 times or 500 times, it's fine. Good luck. Dake saw her shyness and encouraged her. Although there may be changes in this Halloween event, the Crimson Star Award will definitely not be cancelled. I hope you can strive to become this year's Crimson Star. Aurora nodded vigorously and said, I will do my best. Dake immediately revealed a satisfied smile. This year's batch of first years was not inferior to their batch. Although these 1,000 credits couldn't change anything, it could make up for some of the time Aurora wasted to study the recipes. He also wanted to know who would be able to get on the stage of the award ceremony. As for the second year's Golden Orange Star, he was determined to get it. After Dake finished the wheat cake, he talked about tomorrow's dinner party. Yes, Eve needs to look after the shop. Otherwise, it's good to call her. Do you have a favorite restaurant in Traveler's Street? Aurora shook her head and said, I've been to a restaurant in Traveler's Street. Who will be at tomorrow's dinner party? Let me do the math. Dake said, you, me, Victoria, and Phoenix. If we're going to Traveler's Street, it'll be 4. Really? Aurora's face flushed, but then she said, aren't you going to call Deanna? Also Joey and John. Dake smiled and said, no, just the few of us will be enough. I mainly want to personally ask about Victoria and Phoenix's studies and friendships. Aurora nodded and said, in that case, we can actually cook by ourselves. I have a complete set of equipment in my dorm. Cook by yourself? Dake frowned slightly. When he was in first year, he occasionally cooked by himself. But since school started again during the holidays, he had not touched kitchen utensils. Moreover, in front of Aurora, his cooking skills were not good enough. But sometimes, the taste of the food was not the key. He thought for a while and nodded. That's a good idea. Do you have equipment in your dorm to remove oil and smoke? Of course, Aurora said. Not only that, I also refined an oil and smoke beast. As long as I summon it when I'm cooking, I guarantee that no oil and smoke will leak out. Dake's eyes lit up and said, is it the oil and smoke beast? Then maybe we can eat in the club classroom. After all, it's not suitable in the dorm. Aurora was slightly regretful. That's true. But kitchen utensils are not easy to move. No problem. Dake said, let's eat hot pot tonight. As long as we prepare the soup base and ingredients in advance, we don't need too many kitchen utensils. But if it's in the club classroom, we might need to prepare a few more sets of cutlery. Aurora smiled and said, Deanna and Luosi? Dake laughed. We still can't get rid of them. Aurora said, then prepare the soup base and ingredients in my dorm. For hot pot, some ingredients need to be cooked in advance. I'll try my best to prepare it. Dake said, it's okay. I'll prepare it with you. Tomorrow morning, you go and buy what you need. I'll prepare all the ingredients and come to your place around 3 in the afternoon. Aurora immediately replied, yes, yes, yes. There was no dish called hot pot in this world, but similar cooking methods were not rare. When adventurers were camping in the wild, they would choose a similar method if they wanted to eat something hot. However, Dake had told Aurora long ago, and the latter had even tried to do it. The soul of hot pot was the soup base and sauce. To Aurora, this was not a problem at all. After sending Aurora off, Dake planned the number of ingredients he needed to buy tomorrow. Since he was eating hot pot in the club classroom, he would definitely bring all the magic elves, so he would need to prepare a lot of ingredients. In addition, Katrina and Brittany might also be there. Thinking of these two seniors, Dake couldn't help but think of another senior. He pondered for a moment, and felt that he could also try to invite them. After all, he had just received help from them 2 weeks ago. He couldn't remain silent all the time. It was just that this way, the scale of the meal seemed to be getting bigger and bigger. What's going on? Didn't I only plan to have a small family dinner? Dake couldn't help but ask himself. Of course no one answered. The next morning, Dake finished his breakfast and read the newspaper. Then he watered the cat grass and worm tree with the magic potion, and went out with a book. Shungmalian Library. Panduola Doragon came to the library very early. It was said that the best time of the day was in the morning. She also felt that reading in the morning would make her mind clearer. Moreover, not many people came to the library early on Sunday morning, so she could have some peace. However, after reading about 10 pages, she saw Dake appear at the entrance of the library. When Dake approached the counter, Panduola moved the registration form over and said, "Good morning, looking for information?" "Good morning, senior." Dake didn't pick up the pen. Instead, he went straight to the point. "Can I invite you to dinner tonight?" Panduola narrowed her eyes and said, "It's for 2 people." Dake said, "No, it's barely a family meal." "Really?" Panduola complained in her heart, but still asked, "And those people?" 26/127. Chapter 628. Seeing Panduola ask this, Dake knew that she had tacitly agreed. So Dake said with a smile, "Victoria, Phoenix, Aurora, and a few people from other clubs. After all, we're having dinner in the club's classrooms." "In the club's classrooms?" Panduola thought for a moment. "You're cooking by yourself?" Dake nodded. "Yes." Panduola suddenly understood. "Barbecue?" Dake: "Barbecue is fine, but today's main dish is hot pot." "Hot pot, the one you mentioned before?" Panduola was a little interested. "When?" Dake said. "In the evening, after 6 o'clock?" Panduola nodded. "Okay, I'll let Miss Bella know. Don't start before I arrive." "Of course not." Dake patted the little winged dragon that flew over and smiled. Memorize in 1 second https://m, but can't you? VIP. After the agreement was made, Dake didn't stay in the library for too long. He first went to the cafeteria and got some recipes from the halfling chefs. Then he called the 2 magic elves and prepared to go to Traveler's Street to buy ingredients. But just as he walked to the entrance of the castle, he sensed something. Then Victoria, who was wearing the fool's uniform, suddenly jumped out from the corner. He hurriedly reached out and hugged her. Victoria looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "What's wrong?" Dake asked subconsciously. Victoria sobbed. "You're biased." "Boo-hoo." Dake: "Huh." Victoria wiped her tears and peeked. "Why do they have pocket money but I don't?" "Boo-hoo." Dake: "Who are you talking about?" Victoria let go of him and took a step back. Then she counted with her fingers and said, "Anna, and she, Aurora. They all have pocket money." Dake: "So how did you know?" Seeing the suspicion in Dake's eyes, Victoria hurriedly said coquettishly, "I don't care. I strongly insist on treating everyone equally." "Okay then." Dake tapped her little nose and said, 1,000 credits 7 days. Otherwise you'll have to pay 3 points of interest. If you can't pay it in 2 weeks, I'll take it by force. You should know what that means." "It's just negative credits, I know." Victoria was overjoyed and almost jumped on the spot. "With 1,000 credits, I'll definitely earn more credits before Halloween." Dark asked helplessly, "What about Phoenix?" "She's over there," Victoria said excitedly. Dark looked at the corner and said, "Let her come over." He couldn't be biased. There were 4 more days before Halloween. If they could make use of these 4 days, both Victoria City and Phoenix City would be able to create a few useful magic elf cards. After drawing up a contract with them, Dake transferred 1,000 credits to them. Then he watched his darlings, who didn't think of their old father at all except to borrow money, hurriedly ran to the pavilion in the middle of the lake that led to Traveler's Street. Presumably, they were already thinking about what to buy before they came over. But as long as it wasn't for enjoyment or waste, Dake wouldn't care. But did Victoria forget that she's a 6-star vampire's daughter? Dake pondered for a while and muttered to himself, "Well, considering the expenditure and replenishment of magic power, she's indeed not suitable to participate in battle." Then he slowed down and entered the pavilion in the middle of the lake behind them. After arriving at Traveler's Street through the teleportation hub of the pavilion in the middle of the lake, Dake looked at the street full of pumpkins and knew that there would be street activities tonight. This year, October 31st was a Thursday. According to tradition, October 31st and November 1st were holidays. Because it happened to be the weekend, there was a 4-day-long holiday, and Travelers Street would open again on the morning of October 31st. Today was the only day left for the students to buy the items they needed for Halloween in Travelers Street. This day, as expected, would be very busy. Sure enough, Travelers Street was crowded with people, jostling shoulder to shoulder, and yelling incessantly. Fortunately, there weren't many people who would come to Travelers Street to buy ingredients. After Dake found a shop, he quickly bought what he needed. But he didn't leave. Instead, he turned a corner and came to the shop of the Ultimate Duel Club. Eve happened to be free. When she saw the young master, she hurriedly went forward to greet him. Dake looked at the shop full of Halloween decorations and curiously asked, "Business isn't good today?" Eve smiled and said, "Today there aren't many people who came to buy duel plates, Easter eggs, and card packs. The customers are probably busy choosing the costumes to wear for the Halloween ball." Dake thought for a while and asked, "What about you? You're a student of the academy, so you're qualified to participate, right?" "Yes." Eve nodded. "Professor Earbook told me that I can participate in this masquerade ball as a first-year student. But I don't have a magic elf. If I participate, I'll have to rely on my own strength to compete. That's not in line with the academy's principles. So I'll probably just walk around casually. It's fine if you think it's okay. Do as you wish." Dake walked into the shop and asked, "Are the Halloween-themed cards ready?" Eve said, "It's ready. In fact, we've already started marketing outside the academy. The corresponding Easter eggs, card packs, and Halloween-themed duel plates will be officially released on Halloween." "I see." Dake thought for a while and asked, "What about in the academy?" Eve smiled and said, "Because of the timing, the academy will release them on Halloween. Then they'll do some original works at the opening ceremony of the Golden Cup. According to Young Master's previous idea, we'll also sell Halloween Easter eggs with models and cards at the opening ceremony of the Golden Cup. There's a chance that there'll be Halloween-themed limited edition cards inside." "That's right." Dake couldn't help but smile. Rarity was value, and limited edition was charm. It seemed that the teachings he had been teaching by word and example were working well. However, since the shop wasn't as busy as he had imagined, it wouldn't be a big problem to invite Eve for a meal. So he said to Eve, "Get ready. Come to my club's classroom at about 6 o'clock in the evening, and eat whatever you want." Eve paused. When she realized that this was an invitation to a meal, she hesitated and said, "But I'm the only one in the shop." Dake waved his hand and said, "It'll be fine if it's closed for a while." Eve bit her lips and lowered her head to think. She wanted to go, but her rationality told her that she couldn't go. She was very conflicted. Dake looked at her face and said, "This is an order." "Then, okay." Eve said, "Then I'll eat faster." Dake smiled and said, "Up to you." "Okay." Eve couldn't help but smile brightly. After chatting with Eve for about 10 minutes, Dake left the shop and walked all the way out of Travelers Street. Then, he climbed up the spiral clock tower with a large amount of ingredients and brought them to the club's classroom. There was no one else in the classroom except for the magic elf. Dake didn't actually inform the club members, including Deanna and Luosi. According to his idea, this was just a family meal. If someone happened to meet him in the club, he would bring them along. If not, there would be 2 less mouths to feed. In short, it would depend on who was more lucky. I heard that some clubs will also hold activities like a dinner party on Halloween. But they usually hold it on the night of Halloween, which is different from the masquerade ball on the eve of Halloween. Dake looked around and suddenly found that the classroom lacked a festive atmosphere. He called the magic elf for a small meeting. Meow Meow immediately volunteered to make a pumpkin lantern. The rest of the magic elf were also very interested in decorating the club. Dake gave this task to them and started to prepare the ingredients himself. He had a kitchen knife, chopping board, plates and bowls. Currently, he was mainly washing the ingredients and slicing and dicing them. As for the ingredients that needed to be cooked, he had to wait until Aurora finished her work and went to her dorm to make them together. Because there were a lot of ingredients, he had a lot of work and spent a lot of time. But he was finally done before noon. Then he stopped and decorated the club's classroom with the magic elf. The atmosphere in the classroom was very lively. There was a monster running around with the slimes on its head. There was Auntie Bird playing hide and seek with a sub-beast. Xiangbao blended in naturally. There was also Moon Soul, who was pretending to be cold and aloof. With everyone's hard work, the Magical Zoology Club's classroom gradually had a Halloween atmosphere. Dake rarely had time to relax. The hidden tiredness that had accumulated over the past few days gradually dissipated in the busy atmosphere. He felt relaxed from the bottom of his heart. At 3 in the afternoon, Aurora, who came to look for Dake, was surprised to see the club's classroom completely changed. Dake put down the work in his hands and called out, "Are you done?" Yes. Aurora nodded. "I've bought everything that needs to be bought. Let's prepare tonight. We'll start the experiment tomorrow." Dake said, "Then, let's postpone our supper until after Halloween? If we delay the acquisition of the Crimson Star because of this, I'll feel guilty." Aurora blushed slightly and said, "It's nothing. Then it's settled." Dake waved his hand. "Come, put the ingredients that need to be cooked in the baskets. Let's take them together?" "Okay." Aurora quickly walked over and carried the 2 heavy baskets, one in each hand. Dake could only take the last, smaller basket and walked out of the club's classroom with her. Not long after, the 2 of them arrived at the 2nd floor of the aristocrat house's tower. Aurora temporarily put down the baskets, opened the door, and invited Dake in. It was Dake's first time entering her dormitory, so he was not reserved. Aurora's room was very tidy. The shelves on the desk were filled with books that were out of the scope. There were a few cute little dolls on the bedside cabinet. In the place where Dake's lab table was placed, there was a stove, a cupboard, and a dazzling array of kitchen utensils. Under normal circumstances, cooking in the dormitory would inevitably cause oil and smoke pollution. However, relying on the high efficiency of the magic tools to smoke, she minimized the oil and smoke pollution. If it was not for the fact that his dormitory did not have space to store these things, Dake would have really wanted to get a set. He praised a few words before starting to cook with Aurora. The 2 of them worked together very smoothly. In just a short while, Dake fell from his initial leading position to a supporting position. Aurora's culinary skills were very high. Especially the way she cut the vegetables was like the god of cookery. Her wrist and fingers were very stable. This would definitely allow her to achieve twice the results with half the effort in her magic engineering experiments. Dake was very experienced in this aspect. He could not help but observe her jade-like delicate fingers. Aurora's ears quietly turned red. In less than 2 hours, they finished almost all the work. Dake thought for a moment and said, "Since there's still time, let's make a few more side dishes and bring them over?" Aurora nodded her head slightly and did as he said. Dake summoned the little fiend and asked it to call a few magic elves to go to the cafeteria to buy some bread and milk. Then, after Aurora made a few dishes, he helped to stack them into the baskets one by one. There were 3 baskets when they came and 4 baskets when they left. The 2 of them covered the baskets with white cloth and carried 2 baskets each as they walked out of the tower of the House of Nobles. Naturally, they attracted a lot of attention along the way. But they were already used to attracting attention. When they returned to the club classroom, Dake heard the girls' playful voices before he even entered the door. Even if he could not tell from the voices, he could guess who was so energetic. He opened the door and saw Victoria and Deanna playing around. Deanna was here, so naturally Luosi was here as well. Katrina and Senior Brittany were not in the living room. Dake looked around and guessed that they were most likely distressed over the choice of makeup clothes, so they did not come to the club classroom. Of course, this was a good thing. He immediately called out, "Prepare tables and chairs and set up the venue." The magic elves meowed and got to work. Tables, chairs, pots. These things were all moved to the empty space between the 6 classrooms. The magic elves were very excited. To them, any kind of gathering was new, and the activity itself was full of fun. Dake and Aurora began to boil water, add soup, and make the base of the pot and the sauce. Aurora summoned the smoke and smoke beast at the beginning. The cloud-like magic elven flew into the sky and spread out into a layer of clouds in the blink of an eye. The smoke and steam coming out of the pot were all absorbed by the layer of clouds. Dake was relieved after trying it out. Then he buried his head and got busy again. 6 o'clock in the evening. Panduola Doragon happened to walk up to the 10th floor of the spiral clock tower. She only glanced at the club classroom door, and then turned to the small path between the two classrooms. The smoke and smoke beast absorbed the smoke and smoke, but it could not stop the fragrance from overflowing. Panduola's appetite was gradually aroused. At this time, the sky was dark, and there were no magic lamps installed in the open space. The magic elves made a few homemade jack-o'-lanterns and hung a few paper bats and ghosts from the ceiling. Panduola walked into the passage, and the lively scene hit her in the face. She held back her smile and quickly walked in. Since Katrina and Brittany weren't present, everyone present was someone she was very familiar with. Is this a family gathering? Panduola recalled the word family, and her smile became even brighter. Dake did not stand up to receive the senior. He just waited for her to come in and asked her to sit down. Then he introduced the way to eat hot pot with great interest. After the introduction, he separated the small bowls and told them how to mix the sauces. Cub Bear climbed onto the chair, and its big round eyes shone. In its memory, it had never experienced such a novel way of eating. Panduola looked at it curiously and asked casually, "Why are there monsters here?" Cub Bear's expression froze, and the fork in its hand almost slipped. Its monster intuition made it feel threatened by Panduola, but there were too many people here that made it feel threatened, so it ignored it. It did not expect Panduola to point at it. It quickly looked at Dake for help. Dake smiled and said, "It's a monster from the underground city. It's now being raised like a magical animal." Panduola frowned and said, "Monsters from the underground city can come out?" Dake pointed at its head and said, "Usually not. But it's not their bodies that restrict them, but their brains. Their brains are restricted by the underground city, and they can't walk out of the underground city with their own will. In other words, as long as the monsters have their own thoughts, this is not a problem." Panduola immediately asked, "You made it?" Dake smiled and said no. Panduola frowned and asked, "Secret?" Dake nodded and said, "Yes." "Then forget about it." Panduola picked up a pair of chopsticks from the table and looked at it curiously. "Is this the alternative tableware you mentioned before?" Dake said, "With chopsticks, it's easier to pick out the food you want to eat from the hot pot." As he said that, he demonstrated and picked out a piece of cooked meat from the pot, dipped it in the sauce, and put it in his mouth to chew. Panduola immediately followed suit and picked out a piece of meat from the boiling pot. When everyone had started eating, Eve finally arrived. She followed the voice and walked into the open space. She saw a person and a magic elf sitting around a table, eating heartily. There was a large pot in the middle of the table. The water was boiling, and steam kept coming out of it. She could not help but think of the time when she was training in the wild. She also made a pot like this, and then put all the ingredients she collected into it to cook. The taste was terrible. Will it really taste good like this? Eve could not help but wonder. Dake immediately noticed her and said, "Sister Eve, you're finally here. Sit down." "Young master." Eve took a light breath and walked to Dake's side and whispered in his ear, "The Duke said he wants to see you." "Good morning, writing all night long. Looking for monthly votes. Meow meow meow." Chapter 629. Yes, yes, I know. Dake casually responded to Eve's words as he picked up a small bowl and began to put in the sauce. "By the way, do you like sesame sauce?" he asked. Eve paused for a moment and said, "It's okay." Dake scooped some sesame sauce into the small bowl and mixed it evenly. "Sit down. Put in whatever you want to eat." Eve reminded him in a low voice, "But Duke, eat a little first." Dake showed a warm smile. Since her younger sister, Erin, had returned to the capital, she could contact Yvette anytime, anywhere. Dake's original idea was to ask Eve to have a video call during the Halloween ball, which would be more meaningful. But since Irene took the initiative to invite him, he certainly couldn't refuse. But Eve had worked hard in the shop for the whole day, so she should fill her stomach first. Website. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP. After passing the small bowl to Eve, he picked up a piece of meat and put it into the colander in the pot. After it was cooked, he quickly scooped it up and put it into Eve's small bowl. Eve looked a little embarrassed, but she still picked up the fork and tasted it. When the meat entered her mouth, it was tender and smooth, and with the taste of the sauce, she couldn't help but swallow her tongue. Eve subconsciously sped up her eating speed. Dake saw that she liked it, so he continued to put the meat into the pot. This time he put in more meat and gave it to Deanna, Panduola, and the others. Kamang. Little Snorlax suddenly made a sound of dissatisfaction. Dark laughed and specially prepared a large spoonful of meat slices for it. He knew from the beginning that there would be a few big eaters in tonight's dinner party, so of course he prepared enough to fill them up. Eve looked at her young master's happy face and finally didn't urge him anymore. However, although she saw her young master's happy appearance, she didn't notice the sadness in his heart. From the beginning of the meal, Dake had been going through the cycle of cooking sharing, but he only tasted a little. Although he had the urge to overeat, he had to restrain himself. Just like every midnight snack, he was actually controlling the amount he ate. That was truly an unspeakable bitterness. Half an hour later, Dark was finally half full. He looked at Eve, who had stopped eating, and asked, "Is the barrier problem solved?" Eve nodded and said, "I've already obtained permission from Professor Shi-Erfu." Then she retrieved a cylindrical item the size of a knuckle and said, "With this key, I can use the consonance spell to communicate with her in the academy." "I see." Dake nodded. "Let's ask her if it's convenient for us to contact her." Eve said, "Okay." Then, under the gaze of the people around her, she raised her hand and pressed it against her temple, her eyes narrowing slightly. Along with the circulation of mana, the bloodline of the twins resonated, and consonance was activated. Eve's and Yirine's thoughts synchronized instantly. At this moment, even without speaking, they were able to communicate at high speed. After a while, Eve opened her eyes and nodded at Dake. Dake took a bite of the vegetables and said, "Let's begin then." Upon receiving the instruction, Eve turned around, faced the snow-white wall, and cast the consonants again. A familiar living room scene suddenly appeared on the wall. Arvette, who couldn't wait any longer, and Claire, who was beside her, were also reflected in it. Behind the two of them were Headmaid Jasmine and Headmaid Ollie. "Good evening, Mother Aunt Claire." Dake picked up his chopsticks and winked at the projection. "Good evening, darling." Eve, can you take a look?" Arvette said anxiously. Eve let out a hollow laugh and turned around while maintaining the projection position. She opened her eyes and looked at Dake. What she saw would be projected onto the walls of the Duke's mansion through the consonance spell. When Arvette finally saw the treasure that she had been yearning for day and night, her anxious mind instantly calmed down. But she still stared at the projection on the wall and said, all right. Don't move. Let me take a look." Then Eve stared at Dake's face without moving an inch. Even though Dake knew that it was to cast the consonance spell, he still felt creeped out by her stare. He said helplessly, "Mom, have you had dinner?" Arvette finally stopped staring at him. Eve, who was synchronized with Yirine's thoughts, also relaxed a little. Arvette said, "Not yet. I heard that you're having a banquet tonight?" "It's not a banquet. It's just a gathering of everyone for fun," Dake said. "Is the food in the mansion not ready yet?" Claire, who was beside Arvette, said with a smile, "Aren't we waiting for you?" "Huh." Dake turned to the hot pot on the table and suggested, "Why don't we chat while eating?" Arvette agreed immediately. Then Yirine got up and walked to the dining room. When they all arrived at the dining room, the projection stabilized. The people on both sides, separated by thousands of miles, ate together. After Arvette had seen enough of her precious son, she signaled for Eve's camera to turn around and greet everyone present. Deanna, Aurora, and Panduola were already used to the Duke's lack of arrogance. Only Luosi felt flattered. Cub, who was standing on the chair, seemed to know for the first time that Dake was the Duke's son and the Valkyrie's son. He had read many books during this period, so of course he knew what the Valkyrie represented. He couldn't help but shrink his neck and try to make his presence as low as possible. But his existence was so special that it was impossible to hide. Arvette glanced at him and suddenly said, "Is this surely Augustine?" Obviously, Claire had already revealed what happened in the dungeon to her. Cub realized that his identity as a monster had long been known, and couldn't help but become more timid. But fortunately, Arvette didn't seem to have any intention of delving into it. While Cub secretly heaved a sigh of relief, Arvette focused more of her attention on Panduola. After greeting Panduola, she said softly, "I heard that Hephaestus has successfully been promoted?" Panduola said gratefully, "Yes, it's all thanks to Aunt Claire's help." Arvette suddenly said, "She teaches the first years?" Panduola said, "Yes. The first years study magical beasts." Arvette nodded. "Then Victoria and Phoenix will need her to take care of them." Panduola revealed a warm smile. "Although I want to say yes, they don't need extra care. I heard from my mother that both of them are very good at studying magical beasts." As soon as she said that, Victoria raised her chin slightly, and Phoenix's eyes lit up. But then Dake's voice sounded faintly. "But their other grades aren't ideal, especially their history of magic." Victoria's and Phoenix's faces froze in an instant. Victoria quibbled softly, "Actually, my math grades are okay." Dake smiled. "Indeed, after all, you ran 49 meters ahead of time." Ugh. Victoria was speechless. Dake had already been concerned about them before cooking. Victoria and Phoenix's grades were basically the same. Their history of magic was their common shortcoming. On the other hand, summoning, dueling, and magical beasts were their strengths. The summoning spell was a result of their prior training in the control of mana. Furthermore, as magic elves, they had certain natural advantages in this aspect. As for the duel lesson, it was because they had learned the summoning spells better than the average person, and they had also been taught by Dark. As for magical beasts, it was very simple because they were not afraid of danger, and dared to come into close contact with the teaching monsters that Hephaestus had brought. Naturally, they learned faster. However, the remaining theory of magic and potionology were not so lucky. Their grades in these two classes could only be considered passing. But compared to history of magic, it was definitely more than one level stronger. In Victoria's words, history of magic was really too boring. Moreover, the history in the history of magic was about the history of humans. It had nothing to do with magic elves. Then she was lectured by Dake. History of magic had the history of the evolution of magical technology, which was the birth of magic elves. It was impossible that it had nothing to do with them. Victoria was speechless and could only pretend to be dead. Yvette was obviously very concerned about the grades of these two magic elves. Phoenix had accompanied her for many years. Apart from their grades, she was also very concerned about their lives in the academy. It had been almost 2 months since school started. Even the first-year little mages should have recognized the identities of these two magic elves. Yvette was very worried about whether they would be discriminated against. Even if no one dared to bully them openly because of Dake's existence, the silent abuse between classmates was very terrifying. As an archmage, Yvette hoped that her magic fairy could have a happy life in the academy. Fortunately, what she was worried about did not happen. The students of the Shungmalian Academy were almost used to the reality that magic elves were no different from humans. And once Phoenix's true identity was completely exposed, it would only make her more popular. After all, she was Yvette St. Diming's immortal spear. Yvette's interruption did not cause the meal to stop. Under Dake's greeting, the atmosphere here warmed up and gradually relaxed. In the dining hall of the Duke's mansion, many headmaids heard the commotion and came over, one after another. The two sides were thousands of miles apart, but they were having dinner together. After that, Yvette was also concerned about Dake's results. Of course, there was no need for her to worry. Dake's calm and confident answer made her smile uncontrollably. Yvette said at the end, "I heard from Claire that this year's Halloween event will be very different. Perhaps you will have a more enjoyable night." As expected, Dake drank a mouthful of soup and could not help but ask, "Aunt Claire, can you reveal it?" Claire laughed. "Of course not. You will be surprised when the time comes." Dake, I hope it's not a panic attack. Claire's eyes flashed quickly and she said, Yvette and I will be watching the opening ceremony of the Golden Cup on Halloween afternoon. I hope to see you on the duel stage. Dake said uncertainly, although I signed up, the opening ceremony is so important. They should let the star contestants of the senior year, for example, Senior Panduola, go on stage, right? However, Panduola looked up and smiled. Then I'll sign up? Dake was surprised. You didn't sign up? Panduola nodded. Originally, I didn't. Dake thought for a moment, then said, then I'll sign up. Panduola smiled sweetly. Why? Do you want to fight me? Dake touched his nose and said honestly, indeed. Panduola said, then I'll sign up. Dake was worried. It won't affect your study schedule, right? Panduola shook her head. Of course not. The duel won't take more than a few minutes. I'll just treat it as an exercise. In fact, I was going to sign up, but I haven't yet. Dake nodded. If you really meet me, senior, please don't go easy on me. Panduola smiled. Even a lion uses its full strength to catch a rabbit. I'll never go easy. Dake could not help but say, I'm looking forward to it. This dinner lasted until 9 o'clock in the evening. Eve originally wanted to rush to Traveler's Street after eating a few bites, but she did not expect to be grabbed by the back of the neck by the Duke. She could only act as a camera for more than 2 hours. Only when all the ingredients were cleared and there was nothing left to cook did the other side reluctantly stop the consonant spell. If it were not for Claire's suggestion, the Duke would have talked until dawn. After Dake and Yvette said goodbye, he looked at the table and sighed. Let's clean up together. Who knows, we might be able to make it in time for the last performance at Traveler's Street. However, plans could not keep up with changes. When they finished cleaning up and rushed to Traveler's Street, they found that the performance there had already ended. The students had either scattered or left. The originally bustling street became desolate in the blink of an eye. The group was not too disappointed. They chatted and laughed as they walked on the empty street, treating it as a meal to aid digestion. They strolled under the moonlight, laughing nonstop. At 11 o'clock, they returned to the castle and went their separate ways. After Dake and Panduola waved goodbye, only Deanna, Luosi, Aurora, and the magic elves were left. Let's go back. We still have classes tomorrow. They smiled at each other, quickened their pace, and entered the tower of the aristocrat house. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. When they looked up again, it was already the night of the 30th of October. There are still 10 days left in October. Work harder to reach 100,000 words. Brothers, cast your monthly votes. Chapter 630. Aristocrat House Tower, Room 301. Tomorrow is the Halloween event? Dake sat in front of his desk, infusing all the magic cards with magical power and stacking them neatly. In order to prepare for the Halloween event, Kieran had specially concocted more energy potions and revealing powder. The effect of the energy potions was needless to say, and the revealing powder was a necessary magic card against ghost-type monsters. Although he already had the spirit bug that could break through illusions, the spirit bug was very fragile and could be instantly killed by an AoE attack at any time. Therefore, there was no harm in preparing more revealing powder. Other than that, Dake did not make any additional preparations. He was very confident in his current deck, and even felt that he could challenge the boss he encountered last year, the Vampire Earl. I wonder what the rules of this year's masquerade party are? The professors had done a surprisingly good job of keeping it a secret this time. Until now, they had not revealed the specific rules. Remember the website, MVIP, can't you? 6 Of course. Perhaps some of the students who were close to the professors had already received some information, but they did not leak it. In short, Dake did not deliberately ask. Instead, he was secretly looking forward to the possible surprise. At the same time, within the 4 towers, almost all the students were excitedly making their final preparations. The unknown made people fearful, but it also made people curious. Even the upperclassmen, who had experienced Halloween events for several years, were reinvigorated because of this. The students were rubbing their hands together, waiting for the ball to arrive. In any case, the professor's strategy of keeping it a secret seemed to be very effective. It had successfully hooked the students' interest and love to activities. Everyone was looking forward to and longing for an unprecedentedly grand Halloween masquerade party. The calendar flipped. October 31st. According to the past, the masquerade party would start at 6 p.m. sharp. Before that, the students could participate in the activities in the castle until 12 p.m. sharp. After that, they would have to return to the tower dormitory and leave the castle to the professors and the school staff. All the monsters and traps in the masquerade party were set up in a short 6 hours. However, today was obviously different. When the students woke up in the morning, they immediately received a notification from their school card. No one was allowed to leave the tower. Although this ban was only enforced by the guardian statues at the entrance of the tower, and there were various ways to get out if one really wanted to, it was obvious that no one would risk being locked up for such a meaningless thing. So that's why you didn't get your breakfast? Dake looked at the branch card in his hand and said helplessly. The little devil beast sat on the table and spread out its wings like a pair of hands, then shrugged. As a loyal and dutiful familiar, it flew to the cafeteria to get food as usual, but the halfling chef only handed it 2 newspapers. The little demonic beast said, "Although it's a pity the cafeteria can't provide food today." "Then there's no other way." Dake clapped his hands and said, "Although we have a lot of spare food in our dorm, there are always students who don't have the habit of storing food or who just happen to finish it. The academy wouldn't let the students starve for no reason. It seems that this year's Halloween masquerade party has started now." "It's starting now?" The little devil beast jumped up and said excitedly. "It seems so. We were really caught off guard by the professors," Dake said, "because they usually had to return to the tower at noon." He didn't recall the magic elves living in the club classroom. Even Paradise was still in the club classroom. However, he didn't intend to take back Paradise. It was still not too late to recall the magic elves now, but it would take some time to replenish their magic. Let's get ready first. Above the spiral clock tower, as the magic elves were unsummoned and turned into light, the remaining ones in the club classroom immediately became aware. As a familiar, the sub-ancient beast was still in the club classroom. It picked up the little devil bird and walked out of the classroom with Xiong Bao. When it came to the guardrail overlooking the castle, its eyes suddenly widened. "What's that?" Outside the huge castle, black runes converged into a dragon and whizzed past in front of him. Then, a pumpkin carriage descended from the sky, and the purple witch walked out of the carriage. She stepped on the black fog and walked in the air, elegantly waving the magic wand in her hand. As the magic gathered, the tip of the magic wand shone with a black light. A string of runes swarmed out of the black light and gathered into a new rune dragon. These rune dragons circled around the castle, and some drilled in through the windows. Gradually, a barrier appeared and blocked the sky, causing the light in the castle to become dim. The sub-ancient beast stared at the witch with its eyes wide open. The little devil bird in its arms flapped its wings and tried to escape, but it was tightly hugged by the sub-ancient beast. The little bear blinked its eyes, and under its nonchalant appearance, there was a deep fear hidden. Midya Bartholomew, the astrology professor who always held classes in the classroom above them, turned out to be such a terrifying conjurer? Conjurers were also a type of magic profession, but like alchemists, they had become relics of the times. Conjurers often gave people the impression that they were darker and more terrifying than mages. In all kinds of stories and biographies, they always played the role of evil villains. However, they were actually just mages who were good at using runes to set up barriers and rituals. As for the main reason why they gave people a bad impression, the curse ability, it was just a part of ritualistic magic. The reason why conjurers went to the end was because of the appearance of the mystic ritual card. Midya Bartholomew was not only an astrologer, but also an experienced conjurer. Of course, she was also a mage who was good at using the mystic ritual card. In fact, there was no conflict. For example, Professor Kazair was a master alchemist and an expert in magical engineering theory. Little Bear Cub suddenly saw Professor Midya turn around and wink at it. It subconsciously shrunk its neck and ran back to the club classroom. The masquerade party on Halloween was a very dangerous event for it. Normally, if the students suddenly saw a bear cub in the castle, they might think about the reason for its appearance here. However, during the masquerade party, they would definitely attack without hesitation. Therefore, Dake reminded it early on that it absolutely couldn't leave the clock tower tonight. It would only be safe if it stayed on the clock tower. However, when the clock struck midnight, it could still go to the banquet hall on the first floor of the castle with the sub-beast to enjoy the charm of the party. It had been looking forward to it. Inside the tower of the noble house, after Dake took back all the magic elves, he gave a simple explanation of the current situation. Then he got up and changed his clothes, preparing to disguise himself as a vampire before going out to explore. His choice wasn't wrong. After he changed into a black suit and put on a tall gentleman's hat, he activated the vampire ritual. Pale makeup appeared on his face, his mouth was filled with sharp fangs, and a pair of bat wings suddenly opened behind him. Standing in front of the full-length mirror, Dake was sure that he had perfectly disguised himself as a vampire noble. Although he was a bit different from the expected old noble, his facial features were a bit too young. However, the coldness and arrogance of a vampire were vividly displayed. Unlike last year's masquerade party this year, he had the self-awareness to play the role. "It's time to go out," he grinned, revealing his sharp fangs. He picked up his cane and pushed the door open. There were already many people walking around in the corridor. There were many people who felt that the event had started early. Most of the second-year students who walked out of the dormitory had already changed into their costumes, and the students who didn't quickly went back to the dormitory to change after seeing the other students' costumes. Dake closed the door and put his hands on his cane. The little monster flew to his shoulder. "Good morning, Dake." "Good morning, Mr. Vampire." The second-year boy who walked out of room 302 quickly changed the way he addressed Dake. Dake nodded slightly and said in a cold voice, "Good morning, Mr. Masked Knight." "How is it?" "My Masked Knight suit is great, right?" Mr. Masked Knight said proudly. Dake looked at the red fly compound eye mask on his face and tried his best to hold back the corners of his mouth. "Did you buy this from a senior?" Mr. Masked Knight said. "Yes, a senior from the House of Fools." Dake couldn't help but think of Senior Liang. Mr. Masked Knight said. "Right. What do you think is going on?" "I'm talking about the notice on the branch card." Dake thought for a moment and said, "Maybe it's a warm-up event to give the professors time to set up the venue, and the event reward is all kinds of food?" Mr. Masked Knight patted his head and said, "Now that you mention it, it does seem to be the case. Hey, I'll be going first. My companions are calling me." Dake nodded and said, "Okay. Although it's not Halloween today, I still wish you a happy Halloween." "Thank you." Mr. Masked Knight waved his hand and trotted towards his companions, the yellow and blue masked knights. Dake pursed his lips and smiled, and walked forward with his cane. Of course he was going to find Princess Ghost and Miss Fairy. But at this moment, Princess Ghost had just been woken up by Miss Fairy, and was in a hurry to wash up and put on makeup. After waiting for a while in the corridor, Mr. Vampire still didn't see them go out, so he followed the crowd and came to the common room. As expected, the common room was full of people. Driven by the mentality of conformity, all the students in the common room had already changed into their costumes, even though the professors didn't announce the start of the event in advance. This year's masquerade ball was obviously more open than last year's. Without the visit of Princess Elisha, there was also no group of people who deliberately wore a banquet dress to curry favor. Most of the students had put on their personalized makeup clothes. In contrast, the costumes of the three red, yellow, and blue masked knights were nothing. Dake even saw a Tauren in the crowd. "Hey, Dake, over here." The Tauren raised a decorative giant axe and waved it at Dake. Dake recognized the identity of the student under the Tauren's skin from the voice and walked over. Then he saw a pig-headed man beside the Minotaur. "Oh my god, Doran and Pitan. How did you become a Tauren and a pig?" Dake wasn't so exaggerated. He walked in front of the Tauren Doran and the pig-headed person Pitan, and asked with a straight face, "Any information?" Doran spread out his hands and shook his head frantically. Dake frowned and looked around. He found that most of the students were discussing in low voices, but no one could come up with any substantial results. Is it not time yet? He raised his head and looked at the clock on the wall. 7:13. Maybe it won't start until 7:30? As time passed, more and more people gathered in the common room. The public lounge, which was usually very spacious, gradually became crowded. Dark found the translucent princess ghost and Miss Fairy, who was floating in the air by some unknown means in the crowd. But the two princesses, who should have been very conspicuous, had changed into some unknown costumes. They were completely submerged in the crowd and couldn't be found. Joey, who was also in the House of Nobles, wore a princess dress and a crystal crown, looking like a princess. Time passed quickly. When the hands of the clock pointed to 7:30, from the direction of the spiral clock tower, there was a loud and clear sound of a bell. Duang. The sound of the bell echoed in the castle for a long time. The students in the four towers all quieted down at the same time. It's here. Everyone thought so and then took out their school card from their card pack and activated it with magic. Dake also activated his school card and opened the new information. Answer the question and obtain your identity. Obtain my identity? Dake couldn't help but frown. This information prompt was concise and to the point, and it was also in line with the theme of the masquerade ball. But what was the meaning of its existence? He couldn't help but turn his head slightly, wanting to see if Doran's school card had the same prompt. The huge bull's head just happened to turn around and block his line of sight. Dake. Of course, Doran's school card also had the same prompt. And under this prompt, there was a 60-second countdown. When the 60-second countdown was over, the line of words gradually disappeared and the first question appeared. But at the same time as the question, there was another prompt. Remember to keep it confidential. Thus, in the next instant, everyone covered their school cards. The people who had gathered in the common lounge dispersed with a loud bang. Good morning. Early to vote for the monthly vote. Happy every day. Chapter 631. After a while, there were only a few people left in the common room. The remaining few people looked at each other and suddenly retreated to the corner, distancing themselves from the others. Then everyone laughed dryly as they looked at the branch card in their hands. Although they didn't know what the identity had to do with the masquerade ball, since the branch card reminded them to keep it a secret, it definitely wasn't suitable for others to see. Most of the students were sent back to their dorms, and then began to act according to the instructions of the branch card. These unpredictable variables greatly increased people's interest. Dake also returned to his dorm. After he closed the door, the little devil eagerly said, "Quick, quick, quick, what are the questions?" "Don't worry." Dake smiled and sat down in front of the desk. Then he took out the branch card again and placed it on the table. The little fiendish magical beast immediately went over, only to see the first question on the branch card. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP question 1. Between ketchup and salad dressing, which one do you like? A. Ketchup, B. Salad dressing, C. Both, C. Neither. Looking at the first question, Dake couldn't help but ponder. So it's this type of question? Answer the question, get an identity. Maybe it's to investigate the students' hobbies through this type of question, and then match them with an identity? The little devil blinked and curiously asked, "Then if I choose ketchup, what identity can I get? Vampires?" Vampire? Dark's heart skipped a beat as he suddenly raised his head to look at the little fiend. The little devil couldn't help but tilt its head and asked, "What's wrong?" The corner of Dake's mouth suddenly opened and revealed the vampire fangs in his mouth. Then he turned the school card slightly so that it was facing the little fiend. Then he said, "Little devil, you do it." The little devil. Ha! Facing the little devil's confusion, Dake smiled and explained, "The branch card only has a hint of confidentiality and doesn't require you to answer the question honestly. Although answering honestly is the basic knowledge under normal circumstances, this is a masquerade ball, and we have to have the self-cultivation of an actor. By choosing the answer to the question, there is no doubt that you can get a different identity. Then as long as you deliberately control the answer, you can get the identity you want. Of course, The premise is that the so-called identity is the same as what I think. After the little devil monster heard this, it immediately figured it out. So if I answer the question, I can definitely obtain the identity of a vampire? Dake smiled. The probability is very high. The little devil was worried. What if it fails? Dark smiled and said, if I fail, then so be it. This is just a Halloween event. Although I did think about getting the golden orange star, it's not a big deal even if I don't succeed. The professors may want to tell us that the most important thing is to enjoy the holidays. What's the saying? Trick or treat? The little devil, Dake, Dake, Dake. Dark nodded and said, then I'll let you answer the first question. The little devil immediately said, hey, I think so too. Dake inserted magic into his fingertips and chose A. After that, a 5-second countdown appeared on the surface of the branch card. When the countdown ended, the second question appeared. Question 2, do you like to eat steak? If you like, how do you prefer your steak to be well done? Please answer. I don't like to eat steak. B, like to eat raw steak. C, like to eat medium rare steak. D, like to eat medium rare steak. E, like to eat medium rare steak. F, like to eat medium rare steak. G, like to eat medium rare steak. Dake raised his head. The little devil beast, however, fell into a state of distress. Of course it liked to eat steak, and it liked it a lot. But at first it liked to eat raw steak, but then it gradually got used to cooked steak. Now it liked to eat medium rare steak. But if it chose according to its current taste, would it not choose vampire? Dake saw its confusion and said, it's okay, just choose according to your current taste. The little devil heard it and said decisively, then medium rare. Dake nodded and said, okay, I'll choose F. After the 5-minute countdown, the third question appeared on the branch card. Dake looked at this scene and suddenly thought, has the function of the branch card been expanded? There shouldn't be such a convenient program last year. Then he remembered the conversation he had with Professor Cazell, and he gladly accepted this change. Question 3. If a good friend who had cheated you suddenly told you that he was dying and needed 100,000 holy coins to save him, and you have 200,000 holy coins in your hands, will you save him? Yes. Oh. After reading this question, Dake couldn't help but ask, who came up with this question? 200,000 holy coins and 100,000 holy coins. Did they deliberately set up such a small gap? But in the face of this question that would cause many people to have difficulty making a choice, the little devil beast decisively said, how is that possible? A betrayer should have the awareness of a betrayer. Choose B. Should I say that it was indeed the little devil? Dake chose B. The following questions were even more difficult to choose. This was the case in all aspects. But fortunately, Dake chose to let the little devil do it from the beginning, so he wasn't disgusted by these questions at all. Just like this, he answered a total of 19 questions, and finally reached the 20th question. But this 20th question was different from all the previous questions. It was a math question. When the branch card showed this math question, Dake couldn't help but laugh. Which professor is it? The question itself was a more complicated type and belonged to the mathematical Olympiad category, so it required some skills to solve. This question wasn't difficult for Dake. Even if there was a countdown of 3 minutes after the question was refreshed, he could quickly answer it within the time limit. But for other students who didn't have much experience with mathematical Olympiad questions, it wasn't so easy. Of course, it was the same for the little devil. Little devil, you answer it. Although the little devil shook its head violently, Dake still said so. 3 minutes later, Dake wrote down the answer that the little devil desperately solved, guessing. After that, the 20 questions were completely finished. A new line of words appeared on the branch card frowny face. Please wait patiently until 9 o'clock sharp. During this time, you can go to the common room. The halfling chefs have prepared a delicious breakfast for you. Can I finally eat? Dake patted the little devil's head, and saw it put on his shoulder before returning to the common room. When he walked down the stairs, he happened to see a halfling chef pushing the door open. And then one after another, food carts were pushed in by the chefs. The students who came to the common room earlier had already started to receive their meals. He paused for a moment, then walked over. It can't be that there's some kind of trick in the breakfast, right? Dake, who chose ketchup, steak, and other things for breakfast, carried the tray to his usual place, put the tray on the table, and began to enjoy the delicious breakfast with the little devil. Not long after, he was surrounded by Torrens and pigmen. Hey Dake, aren't you going to take off your fangs? Doran took off the Torrens headgear with difficulty and complained. Dake showed his fangs at him and whispered, I'll tell you a secret. I'm actually a real vampire. Haha. Doran laughed. Who are you trying to scare? Dake blinked and temporarily put away the vampire ritual. Doran was surprised. Is this the effect of the outfit card? Dake nodded and said, yes. On the other side, after Pitten took off the pigman's headgear, he stared at Dake's tray and asked curiously, Did you choose ketchup and medium rare steak? Dake said with a normal expression, That's a secret. Pitten touched his nose and said, That's true. Then the three of them ate in silence. The atmosphere in the common room was obviously not as lively as before. Anyone with a brain could guess that in the masquerade ball later, everyone's position would be determined based on their identity. Regardless of the specific rules, it was a very dangerous thing to have one's identity read out at this time. Of course, there were always exceptions. There were always people who couldn't control their mouths. After breakfast, some people returned to their dorms to prevent their information from being leaked. Some people wanted to stay in the common room and watch. They had confidence in themselves and didn't care about their information being leaked. Doran wanted to stay, but Pitten pulled him away. And Luosi, who knew that Deanna couldn't control herself, also pulled her back to her dorm. The common room gradually became less crowded. Dake sat where he was and played with the little demon from time to time, waiting for the time to come. At the same time, in the office of Vice Principal Sarah Shi-Erfu, the mathematics professors of the 6th grade were all in the office. In front of them was a magic array. The answers that the students filled in formed a scroll and appeared on the magic array. These scrolls didn't actually need to be marked. The circuit that was set up in advance had already calculated the results. The only reason they were sitting here was to see how their respective students would answer the questions. The questions that each student received were actually different. Even the last math question was randomly selected from a 1,000-question library. But from these questions, one could still see some biases. And according to these biases, they would give the students their identities. Hey, Professor Li, who was sitting in the middle, suddenly exclaimed. The old professor beside her couldn't help but ask, What's wrong? Lily looked at the scroll in front of her, and suddenly showed a frightened expression. What's going on? How could Dake answer it wrong? Oh. The professors instantly surrounded her. But after a while, Professor Lars Murnau, a first-year professor, said, This wasn't written by Dake Dimeng. After being reminded, Lily quickly flipped through the scroll. After a while, she sighed in relief. Lily was scared to death. Professor Ricky Eric, a third-year professor, curiously asked, Is it that scary? Even if it was written by Dake Dimeng, there shouldn't be a problem, right? Who doesn't make mistakes? Lily puffed up her cheeks and shook her head vigorously. Professor Eric laughed out loud. The office was filled with a cheerful atmosphere. By the way, the person in charge of this year's masquerade party was Professor Lily Laplace. Time quickly passed while the professors were laughing and joking. Almost as soon as the clock turned to 9 o'clock, all the students' branch cards vibrated and made a beep 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 sound. The students quickly injected magic and activated their branch cards. Dake looked around, opened the branch card, and then opened the letter. On the card, a line of words appeared clearly. Congratulations on obtaining a new identity, vampire. The moment Dake saw the word vampire, a smile suddenly appeared on his face. Since he chose to dress up as a vampire, of course, the identity of a vampire was the most suitable. The little monster also couldn't help but laugh. After confirming his identity, Dake immediately raised his head and looked around. The people who stayed in the common room were from 1st year to 6th year. There were quite a few familiar faces. Of course, There were also some people who were wearing leather and couldn't help it. He observed the subtle expressions of those people and tried to remember them. This year's Halloween event's new identity segment already made him subconsciously take it seriously. He had a faint premonition that the competition with the seniors would start before the Golden Cup. Beep! The branch card sounded again, making the students who were observing the others suddenly come back to their senses. Then they immediately discovered that the long-awaited event rules were finally announced. The professors chose to announce the rules after the identity distribution, which set off the atmosphere incisively and vividly. Dark took note of the rule manual that had been sent to the branch card and began to carefully examine it. The little monster lowered its head from his shoulder and looked closely. I see. After a few minutes, Dake finally understood the rules of this year's masquerade party. In general, this was a set of rules that combined directional cross-country and werewolf hunting. This year's masquerade party was no longer aimless. When the masquerade party officially started, which was still at 6 o'clock in the evening, every student would receive a map. There would be 100 resource points recorded on the map. The monsters in these resource points would be relatively powerful and could be called elites. After killing them, naturally, they would receive more credits and better resource rewards. But in order to find them and summon them, they had to complete the puzzle. This was exactly the same as the simulated adventure test, held by Professor Pawa Cheongsi in the dual class. If they could select 20 resource points from the 100 resource points before the end of the masquerade party, and successfully solve the puzzle, they would receive a very considerable amount of extra credits as a reward. This meant that if they wanted to get first place in this year's masquerade party, competing for resource points would become the most important thing. In addition to this part of the rules, the school also assigned an identity to each student. According to the identity, the students would receive different abilities. First of all, there were 10 types of identity, which were vampires, werewolf, ghost, fairy, zombie, witch, undead, bird, jacko, lantern, bichimos, titan among them. The ability of vampire was blood-sucking. Blood-sucking. After revealing your identity to people other than vampires and werewolves, you can get the opportunity to duel with them. If you win the duel, you can take 10% of the other party's credits, only available in the event. If you lose the duel, you will have to pay 10% of the credits, only available in the event. The ability of werewolf was plunder. Plunder. After revealing your identity to people other than vampires and werewolves, you can get the opportunity to duel with them. If you win the duel, you can take 20% of the other party's credits, only available in the event. If you lose the duel, you will have to pay 40% of the credits, only available in the event. The ability of ghost was steal. Steal. After designating a target other than the ghost, follow the target within 10 meters for 3 minutes without being discovered. You can steal 5% of the target's credits, only available in the event. The ability of fairy was mischief. Mischief. When you discover that someone other than the fairy is solving the puzzle of the resource point, if you can solve it first after revealing your identity, you can obtain the ownership of the resource point. The ability of zombie was infection. Infection. It can only be used on people other than zombies. It can turn their identity into a zombie within 3 minutes. Within these 3 minutes, both parties can share 10% of the credits obtained from killing ghosts and monsters, and bear the same fate. The ability of which was divination. Divination. After revealing your identity to someone other than the witch, you will get a chance to guess the other party's identity. If the guess is correct, you will get 5% of the other party's credits, only available in the event. If the guess is wrong, you will have to pay 10% of the credits, only available in the event. The ability of Phoenix was nirvana. Nirvana. You will get a chance to choose a new identity. Before you undergo nirvana, you will be immune to all abilities. The ability of Jacko, lantern, was light. Light. After lighting the lantern, the ghosts killed and the resource points conquered will get an additional 5% of the credits, only available in the event. The ability of Bichimos was monster. Monster. After killing a leader-level ghost, you will get 10 times the credits reward. However, a mark will light up above its head, and everyone can duel it. The victor of the duel can take away the credits obtained after killing a leader-level ghost, and exchange identities with it. The loser of the duel will have to pay 5% of their credits. The ability of Titan was Lightning Punishment. Lightning Punishment. Show your identity to anyone other than Titan. If the other party has obtained credits from a student of a relatively lower grade within the first 3 minutes, they will be punished with a lightning punishment, and 5% of their credits will be confiscated, limited to those obtained in the event. If the judgment is wrong, you will have to pay 5% of your credits, only available in the event. Finally, all the above abilities could only be used once on the same person. Apart from Steel, the other abilities could only be used within a range of 5 meters. Every time an ability was used, it would enter a cooldown period of 3 minutes. 10 identities, 10 abilities. After Dake finished reading, he couldn't help but take a deep breath. The author who could come up with this set of rules in such a short period of time was truly a genius. If these identities and abilities could be used flexibly, it would definitely increase the interest of this Halloween event to an unprecedented degree. He even felt that it was a pity to only use this set of rules once. It could be used in all kinds of competitions, and it could be used in next year's Halloween event as well. However, how interesting would the masquerade ball become under this set of rules? He would have to experience it in detail before he could truly know. Dake's eyes sparkled. He couldn't wait any longer. It's a pity that the masquerade ball officially starts after 6 o'clock in the evening. During this time, I can only stay in the dormitory. No, perhaps I can start searching for the target now? Dake's gaze shifted. He discovered that the students in the common lounge were all restless. Among these 10 identities, only werewolf and vampire could be said to be on the same side. They couldn't attack each other, and there was no distinction of benefits. This meant that if werewolf and vampire could confirm each other's identities, they could cooperate and share information with each other. Zombies and jack-o'-lanterns were harmless. If zombies could find enough jack-o'-lanterns, they could use their abilities to efficiently harvest credits. As for witches, it would be beneficial for them to find out more people's identities as soon as possible. I see. Those who don't want to expose their identities and don't want to have their identities investigated can return to the dormitory now. Those who have other intentions can also do whatever they want before 6 o'clock. Dake smiled. After teasing the little devil for a while, he left the common lounge. He was a vampire. If he didn't want to cooperate, staying in the common lounge would only increase the risk of being exposed. After that, he only needed to recharge his energy in the dormitory and prepare for the opening of the ball at 6 o'clock in the evening. Then he would play the role of a vampire. Letting the little demon beast answer the question is really the right strategy. If it were me, I might get the identity of a jack-o'-lantern. That would be too boring. In terms of excitement, a vampire is only a little less exciting than a werewolf. And after becoming a vampire, I don't have to worry about being caught by senior students for a duel. Although that's the case, it's too shameful to hunt junior students. I'm afraid most students won't do that, and the probability of winning a duel with senior students will be relatively low. Therefore, vampires and werewolves will probably still target junior students in the same grade. Although that's the case, because this is a masquerade ball, everyone is wearing makeup to hide their identity and not the school uniform that directly indicates their grade in school. Therefore, there is the possibility of finding the wrong opponent. My goal is to first hunt ghosts and monsters, search for a few resource points, accumulate some credits, and then find seniors of 3 or 4 years to hunt. After a simple plan, Dake summoned a few magic elves again, picked up the newspaper and books, and began to read. However, his plan to recharge his energy until 6 o'clock in the evening did not come true, because at 11 o'clock, the school card vibrated again. Then, after a short while, he picked up his cane, brought along the little fiend beast, and walked out of the dormitory, because it was time for lunch. Humans were iron and rice was steel. But those who did not want to stay in the dormitory and eat stored food to fill their stomachs would choose to go to the common room to eat. And this lunchtime was the best time for those who were interested to gather information. As the main door of the tower was pushed open, the halfling chefs once again pushed the dining cart in. The lunch was still sumptuous, and the rich aroma of meat stimulated one's appetite. After Dake chose the food he liked, he carried the tray to his usual seat, the empty table next to him. There was no other way, his usual seat was taken. He pulled out a chair and sat down, put the tray on the table, and prepared to eat heartily. But at this time Little Bear, who was holding a tray and walking unsteadily, as if he could topple the tray at any time, walked over. Then he unceremoniously placed the tray beside him, and pulled out a chair to sit down. And she? Dake guessed the small bear's identity in 0.0001 seconds. Ha! And she, the third princess, pulled a zipper from her chin, and then pulled it vertically upwards. Her whole bare face seemed to have cracked open, and it split in two from the middle. Then, Enchi's delicate face and facial features were revealed. Good afternoon, Dake. Enchi winked at Dake, and her eyelashes were amazingly long. Dake could not help but say, although I can see that you have changed into a new set of leather, can't you be a little more creative? I like bears. Enchi said coquettishly. Dake almost thought that the person sitting next to him was Deanna. Oh, speak of the devil. Princess Spectre, who was only translucent due to the inferior invisibility potion, seemed to have smelled something and came over. Deanna sat down next to Enchi without hesitation, and then stared at Enchi's leather case with great interest. Compared to the bare leather case from last year, Enchi's case was obviously more convenient and breathable. To be honest, Deanna was very envious, and Deanna wanted it very much. If Dake had not said something wrong, the one sitting here wearing the bare leather case would be. No, it would be two little bears. What are you looking at? And she glared at her fiercely. It seemed that their common interests were not enough to build a bridge of friendship between them. Deanna turned her face away. Fine, I won't look. Puffed. Miss Fairy, who followed closely behind, let out a mischievous laugh that was different from her usual self. Then a small tiger also walked over to them in time. Good morning. Monthly votes please. _ Chapter 632. This year, the second Princess Anna was still wearing a tiger cub leather case. Just like the third princess, it was a brand new custom-made tiger cub. However, even though she was wearing a leather case, one could still see the joy in her footsteps. It was obvious that she had also obtained a satisfactory identity. Phew, Anna also sat down at the table. Then, she unzipped the head of the tiger cub leather case and draped it behind her neck like a hood. She raised her head slightly and breathed in the fresh air. Then she asked curiously, Dake, are you a vampire? Dake opened his mouth and revealed his fangs. You mean this? Anna turned her attention to the plate and began to eat in small bites. In the common lounge, which was filled with the aroma of food, all kinds of probing were present. The seniors and juniors gathered together. Everyone was still talking and laughing, but there was something else in their laughter. Remember the website, MVIP, can't you? 6th, the masquerade ball had not officially begun, but the students had already assumed their respective identities. The festive atmosphere gradually thickened. Dake cut the honey pancake on the plate into small portions, speared it with a fork, and put it into his mouth to chew carefully. The sweetness in his mouth made him squint slightly, and the corner of his eyes followed some slightly dazzling gazes. He gradually realized that he seemed to be targeted. Of course, this was not surprising. After all, he had always been so conspicuous. Just like a firefly in the dark, even if it unintentionally emitted light, it would still be noticed by everyone. Those gazes were not all malicious. Perhaps there were many people who were just curious about how he would perform in this masquerade ball. The rules of this event would undoubtedly deepen the interaction between the students. In terms of identity, everyone was a hunter and also a prey. After dinner, Dake did not leave immediately. The two little princesses suddenly invited him to take a look at the top floor. He thought about it for a moment, then agreed. They passed through the crowd, went up the stairs, and went all the way up. Not long after, the 5 of them arrived at the top floor of the aristocrat house tower. The 4 towers in the academy were all the same height. Each of them had 9 floors except for the basement. The first floor was the common lounge. Starting from the second floor, it was the dormitory for the first year to the 6th year. The 8th floor was the dual practice room, and the 9th floor was the observatory. Dake had not been to the observatory for a long time, ever since he set up the club classroom in the spiral clock tower. It was lunchtime, and there was no one at the observatory. A large telescope was placed in the middle of the observatory. Above the telescope was a transparent dome. Although it was not as tall as the clock tower, it was still possible to see part of the scenery outside the castle. As soon as Dake entered the observatory, Anna and Enchi, who had put on their hoods again, ran to the window and opened it. At some point, the cool autumn wind whistled in. Dake subconsciously tightened his collar and was attracted by the scenery outside the window. He quickened his pace and walked to the window. He couldn't help but look out the window. He saw that the entire castle was surrounded by a huge barrier. Above the barrier, countless runes converged into a black dragon that roamed the outer surface of the barrier. If he didn't see Professor Mitya's pumpkin carriage in the middle, he would have been suspicious. This year's Halloween is really big. He couldn't help but sigh. If only the Crimson Star's reward was as big as this. The second Princess Anna, who was next to him, suddenly said, "That's right." And she, the third princess, also agreed. Dake didn't know why, but he suddenly felt dispirited. So he asked, "Did you ask me to come here just to see this?" "What else?" Anna was puzzled. And she suddenly jumped back a little, hugged her chest and said, "Don't tell me you have other ideas?" Then her cheeks were suddenly pinched by 2 hands that stretched out from behind. Deanna looked at the little bear that walked into the trap, and was very happy. Luosi walked to the window and said, "It's actually very nice. Also, it has a Halloween vibe." That was all. The 5 boys and girls looked at the scenery in the observatory for a while, then went down the stairs and separated. Although such actions did not seem to have much meaning, the truth was that they did not have much meaning. However, the so-called memories were actually pieced together by these scenes, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Most of the beauty hidden within would leave one reminiscing. It was almost 6 o'clock in the evening. The professors, who had worked hard all day, all gathered in a spacious lounge. Under the command of the first person in charge of this Halloween event, Professor Lily Laplace, and the second person in charge, Professor Pawa Jones, these idle professors spent the entire day turning the entire castle into a huge stage filled with countless traps. And now, it was time for them to enjoy the fruits of their labor. The students danced on the stage, and the professors watched from outside the stage. Both sides could enjoy their own happiness. Lily nibbled on a melon seed and pointed at the mirror in front of her with great interest. Suddenly, ripples appeared on the surface of the mirror like water, and the bridge outside the tower of the aristocrat house appeared on it. Lily had scattered thousands of gremlins in the castle, and each gremlin could travel between the walls at will. Using a special method, she could connect with these gremlins and display the vision of any gremlin on the mirror. Not only that, she also shared this privilege with all the professors present, and each professor could freely choose the point of view they wanted. Of course, nominally, she obtained Professor Shi-Erfu's permission on the grounds of protecting the students. Then Professor Shi-Erfu also asked Blood Maiden Ophelia Bullard for permission. And the other mother, Hephaestus Doragon, was naturally sitting in this lounge openly. Hephaestus was teaching Professor Nini how to connect with the gremlins. Although Professor Nini had some talent, she had never received formal education as a magister, so she had some difficulty in using magic power. Next to them, several arithmetic professors gathered together, and also chose a point of view outside the tower of the aristocrat house. They all wanted to see what the cute little Dake could do. The answer sheet with 20 questions really piqued their interest. At this time, in the 4 towers, almost all the students had gathered in the common lounge. They had been waiting for this moment since they received the notification of the branch card this morning. Now that it was finally here, they were naturally very excited. The Halloween Masquerade Ball could be said to be the event of the year, where it was the easiest to obtain a large number of credits and resources. Even those who had no interest in the Crimson Star and the Platinum Star were rubbing their hands and preparing to go all out. Moreover, this year's Masquerade Ball was so interesting. The students who had obtained the identities of vampire and werewolf were even more excited and couldn't wait. Of course, there were also students with other identities who were worried, but their mixed feelings of fear and excitement were also unique. Everyone was ready to go. In the tower of the aristocrat house, Dake stood at the top of the stairs with Deanna and Luosi beside him. He didn't ask Deanna and Luosi about their identities, but judging from their expressions, it shouldn't be a bad draw. Deanna kept stuffing milk candy into her mouth, trying her best to replenish her energy. Luosi was carefully observing the surroundings, his eyes calm and wise. The time was getting closer and closer to 6 o'clock. The conversation in the common lounge was getting quieter and quieter, and the sound of breathing was getting clearer and clearer. Dong! Finally, the hour hand pointed straight down. A loud bell rang from the spiral clock tower, located in the center of the academy. The masquerade ball had officially begun. The doors of the 4 towers opened at the same time. The students who were near the gate all rushed out the moment the light shone in. He's coming, he's coming. In the professor's lounge, Lily raised her eyebrows and quickly looked for Dake dimming in the crowd that rushed out of the tower of the aristocrats. But Dake was standing at the top of the stairs and didn't move at all. Of course, she couldn't see him. The little fairy with dragonfly wings on her back flew out of a fairy tale, dragging a long trail of fluorescent light in the sky above the bridge. And the students below finally rushed onto the bridge. After crossing the bridge in front of the tower, they could enter the castle and begin their hunt for the ghosts tonight. An unexpected change happened at the moment when the first person was about to rush out of the bridge. From the center of the 4 bridges, a black spot appeared almost at the same time. In less than a second, this black spot expanded rapidly and covered the entire bridge in the blink of an eye. At that moment, in the vision of the students on the bridge disappeared. Ah! The ritualistic scream that opened the masquerade ball soared into the sky, as if it was going to tear the night sky apart. The students who hadn't stepped onto the bridge suddenly stopped in their tracks. But the students behind didn't have time to stop in time, and squeezed the students in front of them onto the bridge. Then, that portion of the students stepped on air, and their bodies went through the bridge, rapidly falling down. Careful! No! Save me! All kinds of screams were mixed in. The students who reacted quickly took out their magic cards and began to summon. And the students whose minds were filled with fear only saw darkness in front of their eyes and completely lost their train of thought. The bridge outside the tower led directly to the 2nd floor of the castle, so the height between the tower and the ground was only the 1st floor. But every floor of the castle was extremely high. But this height also gave more time for the students to react. Some of the students quickly calmed down and immediately summoned their flying element magic guide sprites. Some students directly chanted incantations and cast levitation spells. And some students directly spread their wings. On the bridge outside the Tower of the House of Fools, the first thing Victoria did was to drag a student out of the tower and spread her wings in front of everyone's eyes. Her dark vampire bat wings attracted the disgust of many people, but that was all. In fact, Victoria's identity as a magic fairy had long been known. She quickly grabbed the panicked student, flapped her wings, and took him into the sky. Then she frowned and looked down. After a brief moment of panic, there were quite a number of students who reacted. And among the students who didn't set foot on the bridge, there were also many who helped. In the 4 towers, there was no exception. Even when the students in the towers came to their senses, all the students who fell from the bridge had already been rescued. They were either flying in the air or returning to the 2 sides. All of them were bewildered. Although they weren't hurt, this trap on the bridge, which was completely different from the usual style, still made them have doubts about this Halloween event. Why did the professors set up such a trap? Vidolia comforted the student who was holding on tightly to her, while thinking quickly. Suddenly, she took out a magic card from her card bag, and then cast the usual summoning spell. She summoned a round fat cat and threw it down. Meow. The fat cat suddenly let out a piercing scream. But the surrounding students looked at it with extreme indifference, making it feel the hypocrisy of the world. Bayou. But when the fat cat was about to fall to the ground, a breeze suddenly came out and wrapped it in a stable posture to land on the ground. Sure enough, Victoria's eyebrows relaxed and she called the fat cat back. At that moment, there was a sudden vibration in her card bag. Beep! She took out the branch card from her card bag and activated it with a little doubt. Then, she saw the surprising words that appeared on the card surface: frowny face credits plus 200. Students who saved themselves and others received a certain amount of credits as a reward. And the amount was definitely not low. The prompt from the branch card instantly washed away the negative emotions of the students. The excitement that had just been washed off rose again, and some people even shouted, "Do it again!" The black shadow on the bridge suddenly disappeared, and all 4 bridges returned to normal. After some people tried it, the students passed through the bridge and entered the castle one after another. But at this time, they were even more vigilant in their hearts. This year's masquerade ball was completely different from the past in all aspects. What a pity! In the professor's lounge, Lily looked at the mirror with a regretful expression. She thought she could see a little bit of Dake's panic, but she found that Dake did not go on the bridge at all. It was not until more than half of the students entered the castle that Dake, dressed as a vampire, walked out of the tower unhurriedly. Then Lily heard a few arithmetic professors over there making a ruckus. "I told you it must be a vampire." The first-year Professor Murno had a smug look on his face. This 70 or 80-year-old professor was glowing at this time. The other 2 arithmetic professors gritted their teeth and took out their branch cards to transfer the money. Lily slapped her forehead. This group of professors was betting on her heart. Then she immediately rushed up and shouted, "What are you playing at? Count me in." Dake did not know that his vampire disguise had helped Professor Murno earn a lot of credits. After crossing the bridge, he said to Deanna and Luosi, "Then let's part here. You saw the trap on the bridge before, so be careful." "Yes, yes, yes." Deanna nodded vigorously. Then she raised her arm and flexed her muscles. Of course, she was wearing long sleeves, so it was impossible to see. However, Dake was still amused by her. Then he raised his head and his expression suddenly changed. He took on the identity of a vampire and said, "The next time we meet, I won't be me." "Bring it on." Deanna was fearless. "Then we'll be leaving. Good luck." Luosi waved at Dake. Then the 3 of them separated at the bridge. Dake looked back and saw that Deanna and Luosi were still walking together. He smiled silently. After turning a corner, he began to summon his magic guide fairy. First, the magician secretary. 3 seconds later, a magic guide book appeared in his hand. Then he asked the magician secretary to use the normal summoning spell to summon a 4-star magic guide fairy. First, the Diru beast. After giving this order, Dake used the normal summoning spell again. "In the name of Dake Dimung, come out, dream demon." Not long after, the dark green ghost appeared with a playful laugh. In this Halloween costume party, the dream demon was naturally the most suitable magic guide fairy. With it by his side, Dake did not have to worry about being ambushed by ghosts. "Meow!" The dream demon suddenly cried out. Then it suddenly turned around and looked behind Dake. Dark reacted quickly and sprinted forward. He pulled some distance before turning around, only to see a ghostly figure sticking close to the wall. The ghostly figure was rapidly elongating downwards. After making a turn at a right angle, the ghostly figure stuck close to the floor and pounced at him. Whoosh! The cold wind from the nearby window made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The sudden appearance of this ghost gave him a fright. If he did not summon the dream demon at the beginning, he would not have felt the presence of this ghostly ghost at all. But since he already found it, dream demon, use fright. He immediately gave the order. "Demonic Mimi!" The dream demon cried out softly. It quickly caught up with the elongated ghost. Then, it suddenly slammed on the brakes and made an extremely cute face at Ghost. Ah! But this ghost was frightened by the face and screamed. The dream demon, extended 2 claws from its body and grabbed the ghost when it was frightened. Ghosts usually had a certain degree of physical resistance. But of course it was not immune to the dream demon's claws. After it was killed by the dream demon, it left a candy on the ground. Is it toffee? Dake bent down and picked up the candy. He vaguely remembered that during last year's Halloween event, the first ghost he encountered also dropped toffee. This kind of candy was made of brown sugar or molasses and cream. It was hard to chew. But if you get used to it, it was pretty good. He peeled off the candy wrapper and stuffed the toffee inside into his mouth. Then he looked at the candy wrapper. The candy wrapper was engraved with fine lines. It was a one-time magic card with a time limit until midnight tonight. But if he looked carefully, he would find that this was slightly different from the one-time magic card made by Professor Kazair. It was obvious that it was not made by Professor Kazair. From these one-time magic cards he could learn a lot. So Dake put away the candy wrapper and then took out the school card to check. That ghost-type monster just now had given him 10 credits. There were a lot of changes in the rules of this year's masquerade party, including points for killing ghosts. Except for elite level and chief level ghosts. Ordinary ghosts were from 1 star to 9 star. Killing a 1-star ghost could give 10 credits. Killing a 2-star ghost could give 20 credits. Killing a 3-star ghost could give 30 credits. Killing a 4-star ghost could give 60 credits. Killing a 5-star ghost could give 80 credits. Killing a 6-star ghost could give 100 credits. Killing a 7-star ghost could give 200 credits. Killing an 8-star ghost could give 300 credits. Killing a 9-star ghost could give 400 credits. These ordinary ghosts were not very strong. Their magic power was similar to ordinary magic elves. There was no enhancement. Of course, there were some special individuals. They were between normal level and elite level. The credits obtained from killing them did not change, but they would drop better resources, at least not candy and snacks. As for elite level and chief level ghosts, killing them would naturally give more credits and better resource rewards. In addition, the lower grade protection was still in place, except for elite level and chief level ghosts. Third-year students who killed 1-star ghosts had no credits. Fourth-year students who killed 2-star ghosts and below had no credits. Fifth-year students who killed 3-star ghosts and below had no credits. Sixth-year students who killed 4-star ghosts and below had no credits. Dake was now a second-year student, so he was not restricted. While absorbing the sugar from the toffee, he opened the resource map in the branch card. This was also a new rule added this year. At 6 o'clock sharp, the Academy distributed the resource map to every student's branch card. The resource points marked on everyone's resource map were different. And according to identity and grade, the scale and level of the resource points were also different. The Academy separated the grades to minimize the disruption of the seniors to the juniors. In short, before accumulating a certain amount of credits, most students would act according to this resource map. Dake was no exception. He opened the resource map, injected magic power, and made it float on the card surface. Then he adjusted it to 3D mode. So, a transparent castle made of lines appeared in front of his eyes. In this castle, a total of 100 resource points were scattered in all directions. According to the rules, he only needed to conquer 20 of them to get extra credits. Let's start with the nearest one. 28+/127. I'm not sleeping anymore. I'll continue writing. I'm begging for monthly votes. I'm begging for blades. Chapter 633. The second-year students had experienced the simulated adventure test in the dual class, so they had a deeper understanding of this mode. Therefore, most of the second-year students were like Dake. As soon as they entered the castle, they immediately began to attack the resource points. If they were not fast enough, the resource points would be taken. The number of resource points in the castle was limited, and unlike the simulated adventure test, where each point could be collected 10 times, these resource points would disappear after being attacked once. Once they were taken, it meant that there would be one less resource point to choose from. The later it was, the less likely it was to gather 20 resource points. Therefore, in the early stages, it was best to attack as many resource points as possible. But this experience was not hard to analyze. Therefore, many of the upperclassmen immediately began to move after entering the castle. Fortunately, Dake's luck was not bad. When he found the first resource point, there was no one around. Remember, https://m, vip can't you? VIP is it here? He raised his head and looked at the fairy flying over his head from time to time. He patted the little demon beast on his shoulder and ordered it to enter the classroom where the resource point was. This year's masquerade party was clearly more dangerous than last year. Even the way the ghosts appeared seemed to have evolved, making it impossible to guard against. As he walked, he frequently heard screams. It could be seen that many students had been frightened by the ghosts that appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Those ghosts might not be very strong, but they were really disgusting. Whoosh! The little demon beast circled around the classroom and flew back. After Dake confirmed that the little dream demon did not sense anything strange, he followed the map and walked into the classroom. Just as his right foot stepped into the door, bright red blood suddenly dripped down. Drip? An extremely clear sound rang in his ears. That drop of blood that came out of nowhere dripped to the ground. Then, a bubbling fountain of blood appeared under Dake's right foot. He quickly pulled his foot back, but it seemed to be stuck to the bottom of his foot and did not move at all. Dream demon! Dake immediately shouted, but no sound entered his ears. In the next moment, bright red blood completely dyed his vision red. Bingo! 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 In the professor's lounge, Li, who had been staring at the mirror, suddenly clenched his fists. A few of the mathematics professors also cheered. This is Bloodroom, right? Professor Bacon, who was in charge of the third-year mathematics class, asked. Professor Bacon looked to be in her 40s. She was the only female mathematics professor other than Li. She had short, flaxen hair that draped over her shoulders. Her brown eyes were slightly dark, and her skin was slightly pale. There were slight wrinkles on her forehead, deep eye sockets, and dark circles under her eyes. She often showed signs of fatigue. However, Professor Bacon was actually a very reliable and diligent professor. Li had always had a good relationship with her. 2 meters away, the professor of the second year's magical language class, Holder Bode, suddenly raised his head and said, "It's the blood room that I created. What's wrong?" Professor Bode had naturally curly dark brown hair. The skin on his face was slightly dry, his nose protruded like an eagle's hook, and his eyes were slightly sinister. Although he didn't have a good reputation among the students, his knowledge was genuine. "It's nothing." Professor Bacon smiled at Professor Bode. Then, she turned her head and looked at the other mathematics professors. She whispered, "How many minutes?" The professors quickly stretched out their fingers. 3 for 5 and so on. Professor York, who taught the mathematics elective class, pondered for a moment and stretched out his hands. 9 minutes. Professor Li blinked and said, "Then I guess it'll be cracked in 1 minute from now on." Ha! A cold laugh suddenly came from 2 meters away. Although Professor Bode was very optimistic about Dake, he didn't think that his blood room would be cracked in 1 minute. After laughing, he quickly tapped on the mirror and connected with the fairy at the entrance of the blood room. The image of the blood room's entrance appeared in the mirror. At the entrance of the classroom, the magician's secretary was floating in the air. The usual chanting of the summoning spell had reached the end stage. In front of it, Dake Dimming was still in the same position as when he stepped into the door. However, Dake's consciousness had already entered the blood room. The blood room, as the name suggested, was a room covered in blood. Blood seeped out from the corners of the walls and emitted a fishy smell. The blood that flowed to his feet quickly filled up and soaked his ankles in the blink of an eye. Dake held his breath and calmly observed. Thanks to the experience of the simulated adventure assessment, he didn't panic when he suddenly entered the blood room. The blood room in front of him was obviously an illusion. Cracking the illusion could activate the resource point and summon the elite-level ghosts. What he needed to consider was whether he would be ambushed by the ghost and fairy when he was trapped in the illusion. The ghost could steal credits. The fairy could seize resource points. If he was already followed by the ghost, he needed to crack the illusion within 3 minutes to avoid having his credits stolen. Of course, he hadn't obtained many credits in the event, so he didn't need to worry too much. What he really needed to worry about was whether the fairy would forcefully enter the illusion. If the fairy came to cause trouble, he had to crack the illusion before the fairy did. In short, it was a race of speed. He could only be fast, not slow. Dake looked around and slapped one of the walls. Although the thick blood flowing on the wall was disgusting, if he didn't touch it because of this, he could only be trapped here until he failed and was kicked out of the blood room. The magic reaction on the wall was very obvious. The key to cracking the illusion was undoubtedly on the wall. Bang! Sure enough, with a slap, the blood on the wall suddenly changed and quickly condensed into a large paragraph of extremely complicated magic language. However, with his understanding of magic language that far exceeded that of a second-year student, Dake saw through the mystery of this magic language at a glance. He immediately gathered magic at his fingertips and tried to modify the characters, re-editing this paragraph of magic language. After modifying the first character, there was no more blood flowing out from the cracks in the blood room. After modifying the second character, the blood that soaked up to his ankles suddenly receded. After modifying the third character, there was no more blood in the entire space. After modifying the fourth character, the entire paragraph of magic language suddenly lit up. The light illuminated the entire blood room and gradually swallowed one's vision. When he came back to his senses, Dake had already left the blood room. He stood firmly at the door and noticed a blood-red flower blooming on the podium. An elite-level monster drilled out of the flower bud, revealing a ferocious face. In that instant, a snow-white figure flashed past him like lightning. The Diru beast that had just been summoned by the magician's secretary waved its fists and jumped onto the podium in the blink of an eye, its claws bursting with white light. Cat fist. A shout rang out. The elite-level monster was smashed into pieces the moment it appeared. Meow. The Diru beast coldly snorted and stepped down, crushing the blood-red flower into a bloody pulp. Then, it picked out a seed from the bloody pulp and threw it to Dake. A seed. Dake took the seed and carefully examined it. The seed was about the size of a broad bean, and there were vein-like patterns on the surface. When he approached it, he could smell a trace of blood. He thought for a bit and muttered, "Could it be the seed of a blood-sucking man-eating flower?" Because he had only seen it in books, he couldn't be sure and could only keep it for now. But if it really was the seed of a blood-sucking man-eating flower, he could cultivate a blood-sucking man-eating flower in the dormitory. After the blood-sucking man-eating flower was cultivated indoors, he could use a magic potion to get rid of its biting characteristic and feed it with blood to produce a blood drop fruit. If the blood that was fed was of a single species, the blood drop fruit would have some of the characteristics of that species. In the books that Dake had read, there were people who used this method to cultivate dragon blood fruit. After leaving the classroom, Dake confirmed that no one was following him and took out the branch card to check. As the resource map was unfolded again, he found that a circle had been drawn on the mark of this resource point. This should be a sign that the breakthrough has been completed. Dake couldn't help but smile. If it's this difficult, the 20 resource points should be quickly found and conquered. Little monster, Dilu beast, let's go. The exploration continued. In the professor's lounge, Professor Lily's face was full of smiles. Dake solved the blood drop in a minute and successfully conquered the first resource point. She won the bet because Dake solved the blood drop in a minute. It was a win-win situation. This kid, I underestimated him. Professor Murno shook his head. He thought that Dake would take at least 2 minutes to solve. He didn't expect the blood drop puzzle to be so simple. A puzzle that only needed to change 4 characters to solve. Who was he looking down on? Professor Murno thought as he turned his head and glanced at Professor Bode. Professor Bode couldn't help but pull a long face. However, because his face had always been so gloomy, even if he pulled a long face, it didn't change. The other mathematics professors also revealed looks of sadness. Professor York, who was in his 40s, shook his head helplessly. The difficulty of solving the blood drop isn't simple, but he found the optimal solution in the first place. This should be thanks to his good mathematical thinking. That's right, agreed Professor Eric, who was in his 4th year. Professor Bacon, who was in his 3rd year, suggested, let's keep the credits for now. When the event is over, we'll settle it again. Lily raised her hand and smiled. No problem, I agree. Then we agree too, said the other professors. Professor Bacon suggested again, but we can't keep staring at Dake Dimung. Let's change to someone else first. She reached out her hand and gently swiped across the mirror. The sprite's vision quickly changed. In the end, her heart stirred and she froze the image. These two, what are they doing? On the first floor of the castle, Anna and Enchi were hiding in a small classroom. The two looked at each other, each took out a magic card, and then quickly summoned. As 2 huge summoning arrays appeared under their feet, a black and a white ghost-type magic fairy appeared in the light of the summoning array. Possession Spirit Black. Possession Spirit White. Looking at the 2 ghosts floating in the air, Anna and Enchi couldn't help but smile. Then they reached out at the same time, and the black and white ghosts flew to them respectively. The moment their fingers touched, they simultaneously used their ultimate skill. Possession. The next second, the 2 princesses, who were wearing bear skin and tiger skin, were suddenly swallowed by the black and white ghostly mist. When everything was calm, they transformed into 2 specters that were 2 meters tall. Hee hee hee, hee hee hee. The 2 little princesses floated in the air and imitated ghostly screams. Then they excitedly got out of the classroom and floated toward the nearby students. They had already participated in the Shungmalian Academy's Halloween event last year, so they knew that the ghosts on the first floor were very weak. It was basically a hunting ground exclusive to the first years, and the senior students wouldn't come to the first floor to compete with the first years. In other words, the first floor of the castle was their hunting ground. Professor Bacon, who saw the 2 little princesses from the mirror, couldn't help but ask, Professor Melno, do you know what the identities of these 2 princesses are? Professor Melno was a first-year mathematics professor, so he knew about the identities of the first-year students. He thought for a moment and said with a pained expression, if I remember correctly, Anna is a ghost, and Enchi is a sprite. 2 troublemakers. Professor Bacon was speechless. At this moment, she could already imagine the scene of Anna and Angie wearing the skin of ghosts and monsters, chasing the students of the same grade until they screamed and fled. What was even more terrifying was that Anna could steal credits from the first-year students in the process, and Enchi could seize their resource points. What happened after that was no different from Professor Bacon's guess, until the 2 little princesses got carried away and went up to the 3rd floor. And then they crashed into an iron plate. On the 2nd floor of the castle, Aurora strolled alone in the corridor. Although she was easily shy in front of people, she was not timid in reality. Those ghosts that appeared and disappeared mysteriously could not scare her at all. If it wasn't for the fact that it was not suitable to use the power of giants in the academy, she could even tear ghosts with her hands and kick zombies with her feet. If she could control the sun-moon elves to fight against enemies, even second-tier ghosts would not be able to take advantage of her. However, she did not have any intention of doing that. Since she was in the School of Magic Engineering, she naturally had to use the power of magic engineering to solve the problem. She summoned 2 3-star magic engineering elves, and then drove her familiar, the Ice Firehound, to explore the way and search for enemies. She hunted ordinary 1-star to 3-star ghosts while looking for resource points to conquer. Everything was smooth sailing along the way. And her identity happened to be the Jacko Lantern. As long as she activated the branch card and lit the lantern, she would be able to obtain an additional 5% credit reward during hunting. Aurora steadily harvested credits and resources. On the other side, Joey, who dressed herself as a princess, and John, who was forced by Joey to dress as a prince, gathered together only 5 minutes after the start of the masquerade party. The 2 siblings had agreed to act together a long time ago. Although the rules of this masquerade party had changed, they could not contact each other because they were locked in the tower, so they chose to meet up in the end. Based on the mutual trust between the siblings, they informed each other of their identities after meeting up. Joey's identity was a fairy. And John's identity was a werewolf. The two siblings looked at each other and hit it off. Most of the first-year students knew each other well. They knew very well that there were not many first-year students who were stronger than them. With the cooperation of the two, Joey could seize the resource points of the students in the same year, and John could snatch the credits through duels. They suddenly turned into a pair of thieves, thinking of stripping the few students who were usually an eyesore. Boom. But when the two were discussing the decision, a huge explosion suddenly came from not far away. Their expressions changed abruptly. Without hesitation, they turned their backs to the explosion and quickly left. The pure-blooded dark elf, Vivian Alvind, whose foot was grabbed by a zombie that suddenly crawled out from under the floor, lost control of her magic due to excessive shock. The terrifying explosion directly tore the zombie into pieces. She quickly squatted down and grabbed the necklace given to her by the professor of magic introduction. The magic that went out of control finally calmed down. Let's find a place with fewer people and leave. Vivian's face was pale. The necklace she wore would forcibly activate when her magic went out of control if it sensed the presence of someone nearby, preventing the magic from exploding. But this function would greatly consume the durability of the necklace and cause it to be damaged quickly. Therefore, she had to rely on herself in the end. After 2 months of hard work, her magic control had indeed improved, but it was still not enough. This masquerade ball might help her improve further. Vivian Alvin's identity was witch, but she was obviously not interested in divination. It wasn't too far away from Vivian. The orc prince, Spike Leon, was also quickly harvesting the credits of the ghosts. Spike had given up the idea of conquering the resource points from the beginning. Although he was unwilling to admit it, after repeatedly experiencing the shock of mathematics class, he had long realized that his brain power was limited. Rather than challenging those puzzles that would take a long time to solve, it was better to honestly hunt ghosts. His identity was Monster. But it was difficult for him to find a leader-level ghost in the first 3 levels. It was quite similar to Joey and John. Victoria and Phoenix also had a prior agreement. After the 2 magic elves separated from their respective students, they met at the agreed location. Although Victoria and Phoenix were both magic elves. But Victoria was a 7-star, vampire's daughter. And Phoenix was only a 2-star when she transformed into the Phoenix form. However, the Phoenix relied on this immortal fire seed's sure-kill skill to have an endless supply of magic power. In the case of controlling the magic elves to fight, she had more energy than Victoria. Soon after the 2 girls met, they went straight to the 3rd floor of the castle. The magic elves on the 1st and 2nd floors were not difficult for them. With the 2 of them working together, hunting on the 3rd floor was not a problem. The problem was that many second-year students also chose the 3rd floor. Victoria's identity was vampire. Phoenix's identity was immortal bird. The competition among the first-year students this year was probably more intense than in previous years. There were too many students who had the strength to compete for the Crimson Star. And among the second-year students, Dake Diming's strength was well-deserved to be first. But the new rule of resource points allowed other students to see the possibility of competing for first place in the grade. Whether it was AI Ma or Sarah, they were all firmly sprinting toward first place. Half an hour after the start of the game, the competition on the second-year ranking list was fierce. A few conspicuous names kept rotating at the top of the list, making the eyelids of the students who were paying attention to this list twitch. And Dake had already conquered a total of 5 resource points in this half an hour. If he continued at this rate, he would only need 2 hours to complete the 20 resource points. But that was obviously impossible. Half an hour later, on the 4th floor of the castle, Dake finally met his opponent when he found the 6th resource point with great difficulty. It was a student wearing a werewolf. No, it should be a kobold's leather suit. Originally, his face was completely covered by the leather suit, so Dake couldn't distinguish his identity. But his vampire costume was very eye-catching, and the other party recognized him at a glance. The second-year Dake Diming? The senior wearing the kobold's leather suit deliberately pretended to have a hoarse voice. Dake frowned slightly, but he still asked politely, "May I ask which senior you are?" The kobold senior laughed dryly. Suddenly, he took out the branch card and showed his identity to Dake. I'm sorry, I'm a vampire. A vampire? A vampire hidden under the kobold's skin. Boom. That thick ice wall was actually smashed into smithereens by his punch. The kobold senior's jaw almost fell off. Dark waved his hand at the senior and said with a smile, I'll go in first, senior. Then he stepped into the washroom. What kind of monster is this? The kobold senior stared at the door of the washroom with his eyes wide open. After a while, he turned around and left. Since the person who entered this resource point was Dake, there was no point in staying here. He didn't think that Dake would fail. 5 minutes later, Dake walked out of the washroom. There was an icy blue shell in his hand. It was the ocean's ice shell. As long as magic power was injected into it, it would shoot out a beam of ice light from the mouth of the shell. Although it wasn't very powerful, it was more than enough to chill drinks. Dake put away the shell and opened the school card to continue to choose the 7th resource point. However, after taking 2 steps, he suddenly turned around and shouted, Who is it? Not far behind him, there was the sound of running footsteps, but it gradually faded away. Is it a ghost? Dake said in a low voice. After a student entered the resource point, the ghost's tracking time would not be counted. If a ghost wanted to complete the tracking task, the easiest way was to get close to a werewolf or a vampire when they were dueling. Generally, in an intense duel, it was very difficult for the duelist to discover that others were following them. This led to the duelist having 5% of their credits stolen by the ghost during the duel. Therefore, during the duel, one had to be on guard against the ghost spying. Dake continued forward. He didn't bring too many magic guide spirits with him. Apart from the magic guide secretary, Little Devil Beast, and Diru Beast that he summoned at the beginning, there was only Fairy Ibu and Single Scabbard. The Diru Beast, with the Holy Sword, was enough to deal with most of the ordinary ghosts. The Holy Sword's ability to restrain the dark element was also gradually revealed. Let me see, the closest resource point this time is... Forget it, let's go up to the first floor. After searching for a while, Dake clearly found that resource points also had levels. The higher the level of the resource point, the harder the puzzle needed to be solved, and the stronger the ghost summoned after solving the puzzle. Similarly, the more credits and resources obtained after killing the ghosts, the better. He walked all the way from the 2nd floor to the 4th floor, and now he was prepared to go to the 5th floor to take a look. The ghosts on the 5th floor were around 5-star to 6-star. Occasionally there would be stronger ghosts, but they were very rare. Last year his strength wasn't enough to support him to explore the 5th floor. But this year, he was very different. After a few minutes, Dake found the stairs leading to the 5th floor. But when he approached the stairs, he suddenly heard people shouting at each other nearby, and he couldn't help but be curious. He called for the magic guide spirits to lighten their footsteps and quickly approached. As the sound gradually became clearer, he recognized the unique voice belonging to Deanna. So it's Deanna, no wonder I'm always worried. Dake quickened his pace and didn't hide his footsteps anymore. He directly walked out from the corner and saw Deanna dueling with a squid. Is Deanna a werewolf or a vampire? The moment this thought appeared, Dake suddenly noticed Luosi outside the dueling area. Who is it? Luosi suddenly turned her head, and the magic guide spirits at her feet shot out like shuttles. The Dilu beast quickly stepped forward and blocked the rabbit with a sharp horn on its head. Tianyuan rabbit, come back quickly, Luosi hurriedly called out. After the rabbit's attack failed, it quickly returned. Dake looked at the scene in front of him with great interest. Deanna was dueling with someone, and Luosi was openly watching from the side. Then what was Luosi's identity? She can't be a ghost, right? Dake muttered in a low voice. Although Deanna was acting as a ghost, her companion was the real ghost. Wouldn't that be dramatic? But if that was the case, how miserable would the person who was dueling with Deanna be? But speaking of which, why does that squid leather suit look so familiar? A series of questions appeared in Dake's mind, and he looked at the unknown person wearing the squid leather suit. Then he saw this unknown person in anger summon a very familiar magic guide spirit. Three-eyed squid. It's really him. Dake approached Luosi and asked, "What's going on?" Luosi whispered, "It's okay, Deanna took the initiative to duel with someone." Dake replied, "Yes." Dake suddenly realized that from the beginning, he didn't seem to think that Deanna was the one being dueled. Luosi said again, "Hasn't it been more than half an hour? Deanna has been looking for someone to duel with. Just now, when she was exploring a resource point, she failed to solve a riddle. Then that squid suddenly fell from above." Above? Dake couldn't help but raise his head. But the ceiling was tight, and there was no cave. However, after experiencing the incident on the bridge, he knew that there was a trap that could make people fall directly through the floor. Isn't that too unlucky? Dake couldn't help but open his mouth, and his cold and handsome image of a vampire was almost shattered. Luosi was still explaining. He didn't look very strong, so Deanna tried to test the water with him, and then this happened. Dake Sikit Hephaestus. 3rd grade male. The former squid, of the Marine Order. Current member of the Marine Biology Research Department. By the way, the head of the Marine Biology Research Department was White Gouda. Dake had some understanding of Sikit's strength. Sikit's strength had improved since she was able to fight Deanna back and forth. Of course, he couldn't rule out the possibility that Deanna was holding back. After all, the masquerade party had just started. If she used all her strength now, wouldn't she be lying flat later? As for Sikit, she probably didn't hold back. It had been less than 2 minutes since Dake arrived, and Sikit was already at a disadvantage. Since the shield that measured health was on the duelist's body, they could dodge the opponent's attacks by running. But because of this, Sikit was in a very difficult situation. Another half a minute passed. Sikit was finally knocked down by Deanna's magic fairy. Dake couldn't understand why Sikit chose such a heavy squid leather cover. I lost. After being knocked down, Sikit lay on the ground like a squid that had been dried up in the sun. He looked at the ceiling helplessly. The energy of the barrier on his body had exceeded 2,000 points. The duel was over. Yay. Diana, on the other hand, looked excited. However, she didn't look at her school card at all. It was obvious that she didn't care about the credits that she would get after winning the duel. Maybe she didn't even think about it. But at this time, Luosi picked up his school card and winked at Dake. His meaning was clear without words. It really is a ghost. Dake could almost imagine Scott's screams when he checked his credits later. He took pleasure in Rose's misfortune and said, "Since there's nothing else, I'll take my leave first. I don't want to be your next target." Luosi pursed his lips, but the corners of his mouth were slightly raised. He scratched Dake and said, "I'll find you when it's almost over." Dake's mouth twitched, and he quickly turned around. But before he could escape, 2 people came out from the other side of the tunnel. It was White and Luoboat. 31/127. Good evening. I successfully finished typing 9,000 words at midnight. Including the overnight coding, it's a total of 15,000 words. Good night, go to sleep. When you wake up, you'll be a living person. There are only a few days left until December. Don't hold on to your monthly votes. Vote, 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 vote. Brothers and sisters who love books, please open an automatic subscription, please. Degree, degree. Degree, degree. Chapter 634. The normal ghosts on the 4th floor of the castle were around 4 or 5 stars. They wouldn't exceed the 2nd tier. Therefore, the best of the 2nd years had the ability to explore the 4th floor. Considering the fact that a 4-star ghost provided twice as many credits as a 3-star ghost, most of the top students would give it a try. If they could hold their ground on the 4th floor, they would be able to obtain even more credits. Every 4-star monster could provide 60 credits, which was equivalent to the reward of 6 classes. As long as they thought of this, the students seemed to be filled with endless motivation. Deanna and Luosi were the same. White and Luoboat were the same. Therefore, it wasn't a coincidence that they met at the staircase. White and Luoboat also heard the commotion and came over. Even though they came a bit late and didn't see the duel between Deanna and Sikit, The situation was clear at a glance. Website. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP. White paused, then quickly ran to see Keith's side and helped him up. See Keith, are you okay? I'm fine. See Keith sighed. I'm just a bit unlucky. That's really bad luck. White quietly looked at the people present and whispered, Is Deanna a werewolf or a vampire? See Keith subconsciously said, How would I know? Oh, I can find out. His heart suddenly twitched, and he quickly took out his school card to check his credits. In that instant, his originally rather dejected expression was completely pulled down. White saw that his expression wasn't right, and quickly asked, What's wrong? See Keith's lips trembled as he spoke. It's gone. I lost a quarter of my credits. White's eyelids twitched. She glanced at Deanna, Luosi, and Dake. She immediately stood up and said, Since Senior is fine, Luo Boat and I will leave first. Time for the masquerade ball is very precious. Every minute counts. We have to hurry. Senior, you have to work hard too. Let's do it. Before Seekeet could finish her sentence, he took a few steps back and pulled the Luo Boat into a yo-yo. Luo Boat was dumbfounded. He shouted as he ran. Why are you running, White? White said in a low voice. Why do you ask so many questions? Just run. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had already run far away. But suddenly a scream rang out. White felt the ground beneath her feet disappear, and her entire body plummeted from the 4th floor to the 3rd floor. He steadied his body in the air, and looked up at the rapidly disappearing black hole on the floor with a stupefied expression. I have to climb up from the 3rd floor again. Luo Boat, who hadn't stepped into the trap, also had a pained expression on his face. Without White, it would be very difficult for him to move freely on the 4th floor. While he was thinking, he suddenly felt a tingling sensation behind his shoulder. Then a chilly wind brushed against the back of his neck, and he heard a low moaning sound. He shuddered violently and slowly turned around, only to see a rotten face. Aha. Luo Boat ran like crazy. White's and Luo Boat's screams made Seekeet's expression change. He hurriedly got up and chased after them, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Dake and the other two didn't pay any attention to him. They probably stepped into some kind of trap? Dake thought as he said to Deanna and Luosi, I'm going up to the 5th floor, you guys be careful. No problem. Diana raised her head and looked at him, patting her chest loudly. Dake smiled and turned around to leave. When he returned to the stairs, he thought for a bit, and then stepped onto the stairs. Normally speaking, the stairs were a relatively safe place. Ghosts that were limited to the floor would rarely go near the stairs. Although there were many unexpected traps in today's masquerade party. Even if there was a black hole trap in the stairs, there shouldn't be any meaning to it, right? Dake put a milk candy in his mouth, and called for the magic guide fairies to speed up. But when he passed through the corner of the stairs, he suddenly had a very slight feeling, as if he had passed through something. His slightly relaxed nerves were instantly stretched to the limit. The Diru Beast and Fairy Ibu felt something was wrong and immediately stopped. The little demon beast made a puzzled sound. Demon Mimi? The little dream demon turned in a circle in the air and tilted her head. Dake knit his brows and carefully looked around, but he didn't find anything strange. He couldn't help but hesitate. Did you find anything? The little demon beast and the Diru beast looked around for a bit, and then shook their heads. Then let's continue. Dake took a deep breath. Between going back and going forward, he chose the latter. Thus, he brought the magic guide fairies up and slowly went up the stairs. We're on the 5th floor. The strength of the ghosts this year was clearly higher than last year. Last year, they could still see a group of 3-star ghosts on the 5th floor. This year, they rarely saw 3-star ghosts on the 4th floor. Perhaps a group of 5-star ghosts would appear on the 5th floor. Once a group of ghosts appeared, the threat level would increase by at least 1 star. Because of this, among the 3rd years, many students only moved to the 4th floor and didn't dare to rashly set foot on the 5th floor. The professors used this method to divide the student body. The students that could stay on the 5th floor and above were either in a stable group, solo top students, or senior students. Dake took out his school card and prepared to choose a nearby resource point to explore according to the resource map. Because he was a second year, among the 100 resource points he was allocated, only a few of them were in the higher levels. His choice was actually quite limited. And from here on out, he would need to compete with the senior students. The difficulty would undoubtedly be higher, but because of this, it was more challenging. Furthermore, the rewards he could obtain would definitely be much greater. Meow! The little dream demon's cry suddenly became sharp. The Diru beast suddenly pricked up its ears and said in a low voice, "It's coming." Dake immediately put away his school card and prepared to deal with the incoming ghosts. "Looks like I'm quite popular. There are ghosts coming to greet me as soon as I come up." He shortened his cane and stuck it in his waist. Then he summoned the sickle dagger. Although he wasn't prepared to personally fight the enemy, if he encountered a situation where he had no choice, he would still make a move. Then only 2 breaths of time passed. There was a large number of dense footsteps approaching from afar. Dake sensed that there was a group of ghosts and immediately prepared to summon the demon fox. Not long after, the first ghost flew out from the corridor on the left. It was a fat zombie with its scalp peeled off, revealing its bloody muscles and skull. Dake's scalp immediately went numb. If it was Professor Kazair, he definitely wouldn't refine a ghost like this. He would at least sew up the scalp. Roar. The zombie was more than 2 meters tall. Its head was so big that it was deformed. Its stomach was also incomparably huge, and its appearance was incomparably ugly. However, its forelimbs were thick and long. The muscles on its arms bulged, and even its skin cracked. Green blood flowed out from it from time to time. Dake's heart trembled. He felt that something bad was going to happen. The zombie in front of him was very obvious. It was the Ghost Mother Zombie, of the 2nd tier. Ghost Mother Zombie. S star level was between 4 and 6 stars. It belonged to the undying species, and was of the dark element. It was within the range of the Holy Sword. However, they were usually ghosts that moved alone. They shouldn't appear in groups. Moreover, the Ghost Mother Zombie in front of him was clearly emitting a powerful 6-star aura. There are already 6-star ghosts appearing in groups on the 5th floor? This was obviously impossible. Dake couldn't help but turn around to look at the stairs. He immediately realized what was going on. He had directly jumped from the 4th floor to the 6th floor, or even higher. Dilu Beast. However, whether this was the 5th floor or the 6th floor, the time needed to do it would not change. The Dilu Beast instantly rushed out. Its running speed was extremely fast. When it leaped out, it instantly pulled out its sword. The light of the Holy Sword erupted from the single sword scabbard, and covered its entire body. Its eyes flashed with excitement. In the blink of an eye, it had already approached the Ghost Mother. Attack its stomach. Dake immediately gave the order. The Dilu Beast's eyes flashed. It suddenly exerted strength on its legs. Its petite and gentle body was filled with power. It flew into the air and raised the long sword in its hand. Then it violently slashed down. Hiss! It didn't attack the stomach, but from top to bottom, including the stomach, the zombie's body was split into 2 halves. Then, without waiting for Dake's order, it continued to rush out and face the Ghost Mother that was rushing out from the corridor. It has 6 stars, and its defense is around 2,500. It has low magic power, which means that it has a little more than 2,000 magic power. Its strength should be its attack, but its speed isn't fast. The biggest threat is the Japanese zombie, hiding in its stomach. If the Ghost Mother isn't killed before it dies, it will face the terrifying corpse explosion. The Dilu Beast's attack power is 1900. Holy Ring adds 500. Holy Sword adds 1200. And its control over the dark attribute increases by 50%. It only needs 1 sword to kill a Ghost Mother. In less than 10 minutes, the more than 26-star ghosts, Ghost Mother, were completely killed by the 4-star magic guide fairy, Dilu Beast. A 6-star ghost's academic credits is 120. 20 of them is 2,400. As expected of the first year's academic credit harvest day, Dake couldn't help but reveal a happy expression. He motioned for the little demon beast to pick up the candy that had scattered on the ground. In last year's Halloween event, he only harvested 5,000 academic credits, but this year, he easily broke last year's record. Although this was related to his growth in strength this year, the bigger reason was that the high-star ghosts were more valuable. However, the number of these one-off ghosts was limited after all, and it was impossible to harvest them endlessly. According to last year's experience, the number of ghosts would greatly decrease around 9 o'clock. Moreover, the increase in the value of the ghosts would definitely make the senior students more diligent. Perhaps it would be difficult to find such a group of ghosts around 8 o'clock. At that time, looking for resource points and hidden bosses that hadn't been broken through would become the main direction of the students. Of course, the carnival of all kinds of identities would also begin. Dake took out his school card again and opened the resource map. Then he carefully observed the surrounding terrain, trying to find his location from the map. It took him nearly 5 minutes just to do that. After he roughly determined his location, he began to look for the nearest resource point. The moment he accurately found the resource point, he was finally sure that he had indeed entered the 6th floor of the castle. The 6th floor, it's easier than I thought. Dark said in a low voice and stepped into the warehouse where the resource point was located. He didn't enter an illusion. He paused for a moment and continued to enter. This warehouse was piled up with a large number of stacked tables and chairs. The tables and chairs were covered in dust, and there was a half-skinned mannequin in the corner. He glanced at the mannequin and couldn't help but frown. I didn't trigger any mechanism. The puzzles of resource points were generally divided into 2 types. One type was the puzzles that would be triggered when entering with the school card. The other type was the type that wouldn't be triggered and needed to be found and triggered by oneself. For the second type of puzzles, finding itself was part of the puzzle. In this case, what needed to be considered was whether the resource point had been broken through in advance. Dake looked around and confirmed that there were only his footprints on the dusty ground before he began to search. The most suspicious thing in this warehouse is without a doubt that mannequin, but it could also be a smokescreen. Perhaps the tables and chairs everywhere are the key? Dake thought for a moment, and had the little devil and dream demon stand guard outside, while he had the fairy Ibu and the Dilu beast enter the warehouse to help. Fairy Ibu, take out the mannequin in the corner. Carat Omega Carat. Fairy Ibu immediately stretched out her ribbon and forcefully pulled out the mannequin in the corner. Dake lowered his head and looked for a moment before shaking his head. There's no magic aura. Then he had the Dilu beast move the mannequin out of the warehouse and had Fairy Ibu move the tables and chairs out of the warehouse one by one. Using this almost violent method, he quickly moved the majority of the tables and chairs out, and then he found a chair that couldn't be moved. Looking at the chair that seemed to be welded to the ground, Dake couldn't help but smile. Dilu beast, sit up and take a look. The Dilu beast nodded and hugged the single sword scabbard. He jumped onto the chair, and then sat down. It was also at that moment that the warehouse began to shake. It's here. Dake's eyes suddenly lit up. This type of resource point would summon elite-level monsters after finding the mechanism and triggering it. Compared to the resource points that focused on solving puzzles, this type of resource point was clearly more focused on fighting. Killing this monster would give you credits and resources as a reward. I wonder how many credits the resource point on the 6th floor of the castle will reward. Dake quickly retreated to the door, waiting for the elite-level monsters to appear. Suddenly, there was a repulsive force on the chair, and the Dilu beast that was sitting on it was suddenly sent flying. The Dilu beast twisted its body in the air, adjusting its posture, and nimbly landed on the ground. But when it turned around, its eyes were filled with killing intent. On the chair, a translucent ghost silently appeared. That ghost was wearing battle armor, holding a halberd, and had a golden crown on its head. It looked like a general, but also like a king. Dake was unable to call out its specific name. For the time being, he called it the Ghost King. This Ghost King was clearly a ghost-type undying species. Looking at its aura, it did not seem to have the dark attribute. This was not good news. Dilu beast, can you do it? Dake asked. The Dilu beast raised its eyebrows and said without hesitation, of course. Dake nodded slightly. Then I'll leave it to you. After being replenished by the energy medicine, the Dilu beast that was at its peak state pressed its hand on the hilt of its sword and charged forward. The size of this warehouse was limited, so its speed would be limited. But the opponent's body was bigger, and it was using a long weapon, so it would be limited even more. A sword light flashed, and the Dilu beast had already unsheathed its sword. After the enhancement, its attack power reached up to 3,600 points, giving it the ability to break through the defense of a 6-star monster. As long as it could break through the defense, it had the confidence to rely on its speed and skill to break through the enemy. Meow. After a shout, the tip of the single sword scabbard was already in front of the Ghost King's neck. It avoided the body that was wearing battle armor and attacked the neck that had a weaker defense, piercing through its throat. The Dilu beast's goal was obvious. However, under the stimulation of the sword, the Ghost King suddenly opened its eyes, and a dazzling golden light was emitted from its eyes. Meow. The Dilu beast instantly felt a strong sense of danger, but the arrogance in its heart did not allow it to withdraw its sword to block. Instead, it continued to stab forward. Then, its body was completely exposed to the golden light. Puchi, the holy sword, stabbed into the half-real, half-illusory body. However, when it wanted to continue, the Dilu beast's body was locked by the golden light. The golden light dissipated slightly, revealing golden chains that tightly bound his wrists, ankles, and body. They stretched out in all directions. Dilu beast cat's eye. While it was slightly panicking, the Dilu beast suddenly heard Dake's command, and its eyes opened wide. A spinning red wheel appeared in its eyes, and it suddenly shot out. The Ghost King was using its killing move, and it immediately locked eyes with the Dilu beast's cat's eye. In that instant, it suddenly felt dizzy. Although it was not successfully confused, it loosened its control over the golden chains. Cat's fist. Dake issued another command. The Dilu beast's heart moved. It clenched its left claw, and a white light bloomed. However, it did not attack, and instead used the energy to grab the golden chains, tearing them apart. Fairy Ibu bewitching voice. Meow heartsuit. A cute cry sounded at this moment. Fairy Ibu, who had unknowingly put on the moon pendant, softly chanted a bewitching song. The Dilu beast immediately calmed down. Its right hand loosened, and its left hand grabbed the single sword scabbard. Then it turned its wrist, and the chains on its body were quickly shattered. After landing, it did not avoid the Ghost King's calf at all. The sound of silk ripping could be heard as his calf was cut open. Roar! The Ghost King immediately let out a terrifying howl. The halberd in its hand fiercely stomped, causing the warehouse to shake, and a ring of intense golden light burst out. That golden light formed a ring, and it actually pushed the Dilu beast to the wall. However, Fairy Ibu's bewitching voice did not stop. The ghost light that had just broken free fell into the bewitching state once again. The Dilu beast slid down from the wall, and once again gripped the single sword scabbard. The killing intent in its eyes became even stronger. 7 stars. Dake said in a low voice. His tone revealed a hint of seriousness. This Ghost King was at least 7 stars. After being strengthened, its mana was several times higher than normal. Under normal circumstances, if both sides did not use their killing moves, the Dilu beast might not be its opponent. Unfortunately, a mage was never a one-on-one job. Luckily, it's not the Ghost Queen. Dake's lips curled up, and he ordered the Dilu beast to attack again. When the Dilu beast held the single sword scabbard and completely pierced through the Ghost King's neck, it finally woke up from the bewitching state. However, the Dilu beast turned its wrist and used all its strength to instantly behead it. The Ghost King's head fell, but its body that was sitting on the chair was still straight. It did not die. However, it had lost its head. The Dilu beast slightly retreated. Fairy Ibu stopped her singing. The headless body of the Ghost King slowly stood up from the chair. The halberd in its hand was already wrapped in golden light. The battle entered the second round. 3 minutes later, the Ghost King that had lost its head was finally killed by the Dilu beast. The red flush on the Dilu beast's face that represented excitement gradually disappeared. The Ghost King's body disappeared in the scattered light. On the chair, the gift box of the one-time magic conducting card appeared. Dake walked into the room, opened the gift box, and saw a translucent pearl. Soul pearl? Dake's heart skipped a beat, and he carefully examined it. This soul pearl was shrouded in gray fog, and it emitted an extremely pure ghost-type energy aura. Although it did not have any special effects, it was because of this that it became an extremely good core material for refining a ghost-type magic conducting fairy. Dake could not help but turn his head to look outside the door. Although the little dream demon had received the order to guard, it was currently peeping inside mischievously. When it noticed Dake's gaze, it immediately turned around and pretended to be guarding seriously. Dake's face revealed a helpless smile, and then he put away the soul pearl. The experience of successfully refining the dream demon made him realize that the compatibility between bliss and ghost type was extremely high. Using this high-purity soul pearl, together with the soul remnant of the soul sucker that he obtained from the underground city, he might be able to refine a high-star ghost-type magic-conducting fairy. Although the method of evolving from a low star to a high star was more convenient to summon, a high-star ghost-type magic-conducting fairy could not be restricted and had the advantage of being able to exist for a long time. This was very important in actual battles. It was impossible for a Magus to completely enclose his stage in a Magus duel. Actual battles were still important. For the ghost type, using the fruit of the fox grass, I might be able to refine a pink ghost-type magic-conducting fairy that originated from a Pokémon. After tonight, I'll think about it carefully. After Dake put away the soul pearl, he bent down and picked up the Dilu beast while it was struggling. He patted its head and asked, "Are you tired?" The Dilu beast turned its head and said without hesitation, "Not tired." Dake said helplessly, "Let's rest for a while." Dilu beast, "No need," Dake said. "Rest for an hour until 8 o'clock. The Dilu beast frowned and thought for a while, then nodded slightly. "Okay." Dark put it down and then picked out a 1-star magic guide sprite from his card pack. Fruit Gnawing Bug. In the name of Dake Dimung I summon Fruit Gnawing Bug. When the Fruit Gnawing Bug was summoned, he picked it up and said, "I'll have to trouble you to be the sacrifice." The Fruit Gnawing Bug shook and said, "Okay." Dake continued to summon. Then with the 4-star Dilu beast and the 1-star Fruit Gnawing Bug as the sacrifice, I'll summon Lion Beast. As the huge sacrificial summoning array opened up in the warehouse, the Dilu beast that had been fighting until now and the Fruit Gnawing Bug that had just been summoned turned into light and disappeared. Then the Lion Beast that was in its peak state appeared from the sacrificial summoning array. "Take it." Dake threw the single sword scabbard to it and smiled. "I'll leave the rest to you." The Lion Beast knelt down on one knee and nodded. "Understood." The 5-star Lion Beast had more comprehensive stats than the Dilu Beast. After equipping the single sword scabbard, its attack was also higher than the Dilu Beast. It could raise its attack to 3,800 points. If the target was a normal dark-type monster, even if it was a 6-star one, it could be easily killed. But if it was a specter-type or other type monster that wasn't a fiend, it would be more difficult. Considering the issue of efficiency, if he encountered a group of monsters, Dake might choose to temporarily avoid them. He thought about how to stand firm on the 6th floor and walked out of the warehouse. At this moment, there were still 6 magic guide fairies by his side. The single sword scabbard had always been in the form of a weapon. The little fiend Dream Demon, magic guide secretary, and Fairy Ivan hadn't done much before, so there was no need to change them. On this kind of stage, Fairy Ivan's charming body could be used very well. Together with her bewitching voice, she could even charm a group of male monsters. Every time he saw a group of males being charmed and losing their ability to fight, Dake couldn't help but sigh, femme fatale. Let's go to the 8th resource point. Dake opened the resource map and carefully selected. After confirming his target, he quickly moved forward. About 3 minutes later, when he was about to reach the 8th resource point, the school card in his hand suddenly vibrated. This notification instantly alerted him. He didn't hesitate to infuse his magic power to check his credits. The final result was as expected. 5% less. It was stolen by the ghost. He suddenly turned around to check, but since the other party was able to silently follow him for 3 minutes without being discovered, it was impossible to see with the naked eye. Fury +1. Although this is part of the game, it's still so infuriating. At this moment, Dake finally experienced a fifth of Seakeet's pain. But of course he couldn't admit defeat like Seakeet. Almost without hesitation, he took out the spider pearl from his card pack and summoned it on the spot. In the name of Dake Dimming, I summon the spider pearl. 3 seconds later, a white pearl appeared on the surface of the spider pearl card. On top of the pearl, there was a transparent shadow of a spider, emitting a sparkling light. Dake raised the pearl, infused it with magic power, and whispered, "Spider sense." His senses became abnormally sharp, and the white pearl in his hand suddenly emitted a bright white light. The white light was like a spider's web that shot in all directions, penetrating the walls without any resistance and spreading quickly. He closed his eyes on the spot, and a huge spider web appeared in his mind. The light that formed the spider web was connected to his senses, and it clearly reflected all kinds of subtle reactions. Found it. Dake's heart skipped a beat, and a faint shadow of a human figure appeared in the huge spider web. He didn't open his eyes immediately, but he controlled the light to gather in a certain direction. When he summoned the spider pearl, the other magical fairies except the dream demon noticed that someone was following them. When they saw the light gathering, the lion beast that was in charge of attacking immediately charged in the direction of the light gathering. The ghost's ability could only be activated within 10 meters, and during the activation process, it couldn't be more than 10 meters away. Therefore, if the ghost wanted to successfully steal, it would usually be closer. Under normal circumstances, this would be very difficult to do. However, the layout of the castle was complicated, and ghosts or traps would suddenly appear along the way. Therefore, if one chose the right time to attack, there was still a chance to complete the steal. However, the ghost in front of him had been following Dake ever since he came out of the warehouse. During this process, Dake didn't encounter any ghosts, so he wasn't distracted at all. He was obviously very good at hiding. However, his biggest mistake was not running away immediately after successfully steal. The distance of less than 10 meters was only a few steps for the lion beast. Facing the lion beast's pressure and the rapidly approaching sword, the ghost couldn't continue hiding. Hiss! Sure enough, there was something rushing out from the empty void. The lion beast frowned, and the holy sword, in its hand mercilessly slashed out. Hiss! This time, the snake's hiss was even clearer. The single scabbard blade was bitten by a python that gradually appeared out of thin air. The ghost, who was wrapped around by the python's body, gradually revealed himself. Most invisibility abilities couldn't be maintained under strong external stimulation. Although the ghost's invisibility ability was very strong, it didn't seem to be an exception. Dake finally saw the thief who stole his credits. Since the thief was wearing a makeup suit and not a school uniform, Dake couldn't recognize the ghost's year in school. However, the leather suit he was wearing was very unique, and Dake had a vague impression of it. Is it a senior from the Noble Academy? Dake asked directly. How troublesome. The ghost sighed and pushed away the python that was wrapped around his body. The snake-like magic elf had delicate snow-white snake scales. From head to toe, except for its red eyes and snake tongue, everything else was white. The ghost himself was wearing the same white snakescale leather suit, and even his head was stuffed inside. It seemed like he was acting as a naga. This kind of monster's appearance was very suitable for a Halloween costume party, and it was obvious that he had put in a lot of effort. However, the naga's leather suit only covered half of his body, and his feet were still wearing the school uniform pants. Dake had a deep impression of this back then. How about we part on good terms? The ghost raised his hands that were sticking out of the 2 holes in the leather suit and surrendered. You see, it's only 5% of the credits. It's not worth wasting our time. You continue to conquer your resource points, and I'll continue to look for the next target. Both of us have a bright future. Dake looked at the ghost, and the anger in his heart suddenly disappeared. He touched his nose, walked forward, and asked curiously, "So, Senior, you've already stolen a lot of people?" "Not bad." The ghost put down his hands. Dark, on the other hand, raised his hand as he walked closer. The ghost's expression suddenly changed. "Hey." However, Dake had already activated the school card in his hand, and the word vampire appeared on the card. As long as the vampire identity was revealed to the other party within 3 meters, regardless of whether the other party saw it clearly or not, the vampiric ability would immediately be activated. For example, Deanna used this little trick to make Keat unable to distinguish whether she was a werewolf or a vampire. Of course, after the duel, what should be known would still be known, but the price would be a little heavy. However, if the one who lost the duel was a werewolf or a vampire, they could hide their identity a little. Dake didn't use this trick. Instead, he waited until the ghost saw it clearly before he suddenly said, "Then, Senior, you must have obtained a lot of credits in the event, right?" In the blink of an eye, the ghost's vampiric card sensed the activation of the vampiric ability and immediately connected with Dake's vampiric card. 2 blood-red lines appeared under Dake's feet and quickly spread along the arc until they finally reached the bottom of the ghost's feet. The distance between the two parties was less than 3 meters, and the dual field, outlined by the blood-red lines, was extremely small. Dake didn't have any intention of expanding it. After activating the vampiric ability, he immediately inserted the vampiric card into his card pack and then took out another magic card. The school card emitted a white light from the card pack. After it connected with the huge barrier outside the castle, a spherical transparent barrier was created between the two parties in the duel. When the barrier was formed, the 0 energy number appeared on it, and the duel instantly began. This kind of instant duel didn't require the summoning of the magic fairy again. Lion Beast. Dake's voice suddenly rose. When the lion beast attacked the python, he quickly retreated, but at the same time, he placed the magic card in front of his chest and summoned with extreme speed. 5 of 127, returned to the realm of the underworld, 9,000 words begging for votes. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.